Peter.
I'm William Bramble. I'm a National Resource Specialist for Human Performance.
Captain Van McKinney, Aerospace Engineer, Helicopters.
I'm Sarah Lewis, Air Traffic Control Investigator.
Marie Moeller, Vehicle Performance Investigator.
Michael Portman, Aerospace Engineer, Vehicle Recorders.
Catherine Wilson, Human Performance.
Brian Soper, Lead Air Traffic Investigator.
Jihoon Shin, Helicopter Engineer.
I'm Brian Fuchs, Materials Engineer, and I will be running the audio-visual today.
Good morning, I'm Anthony Lamb, Transportation Safety Specialist. I'm running the timer today.
Good morning, Dr. Jana Price, Transportation Safety Specialist.
Lauren Groff, Chief Data Scientist.
Sean Payne, Branch Chief Vehicle Recorders Division.
Tim LeBaron, Director of Aviation Safety.
Thank you. Jana, you got introduced twice. She'll be in the front row next. So behind me is Mr. Daniel Baranowski. He'll provide legal support throughout the investigative hearing. And for those in the room, several representatives from our Transportation Disaster Assistance Division are here to provide support throughout the proceedings today. Can TDA please stand up? We have folks there all around. Thank you very much. And once again, volunteer mental health clinicians from the American Red Cross can provide emotional support for anyone attending. I'd like to thank the Red Cross for being here throughout this hearing and certainly throughout all our investigative work, whether it's this investigation or others. Turning to the parties to the hearing, as I call the name of each party, I ask the designated spokesperson to identify themselves and then introduce others at their table. We'll start with Airline Pilots Association.
Good morning, I'm Captain Daniel Mullen Alpa, spokesperson and party coordinator. With me today, Chris Heck. Next to him, Captain Matt Gorshey, Shay Bohm across the table, and we have Captain Mike Palazzolo, Captain Russell Page.
Federal Aviation Administration.
Good morning, Chairwoman. My name is Todd Gentry. I'm the agency spokesperson for the hearing today. Beside me is Patrick Lush, the agency's lead investigator and party coordinator. We have two SMEs with us today. We have Alex Rodriguez and Andy Shaw for the first panel. Heidi Kemner is the Federal Aviation hearing officer, and in front of me is Chris Stevenson, our counsel.
Thank you so much, FAA. National Air Traffic Controllers Association.
Good morning, Chairwoman. John Murdoch, I'm the party spokesman for NECA today. I'm the safety representative. Across the table from me is Seth Myers, party coordinator. To his left is Cher Oxenberg, safety rep. To her left is Sandra Fulmer, safety rep. And to my right, Karina Marinas, air safety investigator. And to her right is Natalie Moffett, NACA attorney.
Thank you very much. PSA Airlines.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Darren Hall. I'm the Vice President of Safety, Security, and Development for PSA. At the end of the table, we have our Director of Operations, Captain Lucas Bowden, and beside me is our legal counsel, Benjamin Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Sikorsky.
Good morning, ma'am. I'm Dave Blair, the Chief Pilot for Safety with Sikorsky. Behind me is Jill Browning, our Chief Air Safety Investigator. To my right is Paul Bowles, our Chief Counsel. To my other right again is Kyle DeLong, our Director for Aviation Safety and Airworthiness, and Dan Cooper, who you met, our Senior Technical Fellow.
Wonderful. And the U.S. Army.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Brigadier General Matt Brayman. I'm the party spokesman. And with me is Colonel Matt Parker, our Army Party Coordinator, Colonel Noah Fontenez, our legal counsel, Colonel Kevin Easter, the Deputy Director of Aviation. We've got CBO5, Bob Phillips, the Army's Standardization Officer, and Mr. David George, Technical Lead for Assured Airspace Access Systems.
Thank you, and thank you all for your participation in the proceedings. To ensure all questions were answered yesterday, we shifted panel 4 to today, so we all appreciate everyone's flexibility. And we'll begin on panel 4 in just a few moments with collision avoidance technology. Later today, we'll move to panel 5, which will address safety data and safety management systems at the various organizations. We'll break for lunch and throughout as needed, so please remain flexible. And we'll follow the same process for both panels. Dr. Bauer will introduce the topics to be addressed, as well as the technical panel members and witnesses. I'll then swear in the witnesses who will be questioned in the following order. First by the NTSB technical panel, next by the parties to the hearing, and finally by the Board of Inquiry. And then on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank the many witnesses testifying today, many of which have been here throughout the entire proceedings. So thank you so much for your work and for being here and for your support of aviation safety. And again, just a reminder that we ask all witnesses to be present until we adjourn, unless you've coordinated that in advance with the hearing officer, who will coordinate with me. And next, the hearing officer will describe the exhibits. Dr. Bauer.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hamady. Exhibits for this hearing include reports produced by NTSB investigative staff, videos, and other documents submitted by the technical panel members, witnesses, and parties to support the testimony and questions you will hear today. The exhibits for this hearing are in the docket. The docket number is SA-544. That's Sierra Alpha 544. The NTSB is authorized by statute to disclose information to carry out its mission, but we protect confidentiality and proprietary information to the extent possible. As such, the exhibits contain redactions. These are the result of negotiations between the parties and the NTSB regarding the disclosure of information claimed to be personally identifiable, security sensitive, or proprietary in nature. Though redacted, the exhibits contain sufficient information so that the members of the public can refer to them during the hearing and throughout the NTSB investigation. The exhibits entered into the record and any presentations, along with other records of the investigation, become part of the NTSB public docket and are available via the NTSB website, ntsb.gov. The public docket opened Wednesday morning. Party spokespersons and witnesses have been provided electronic copies of the public docket containing the exhibits identified above. The docket is located on the investigation page, which you can access in one of two ways: by visiting ntsb.gov, or if you've joined us in person, you can scan the QR code on the hearing agenda. On the investigation page, you will find the link to the public docket on the right-hand side, just below the map. A transcript of the testimony taken during the hearing will be prepared and entered into the docket as soon as possible. In addition, Mr. Baranovsky will keep a list of any documents admitted during the hearing that are not currently exhibits in the NTSB public docket. These documents will be submitted after the hearing and entered into the docket. As a reminder, if a party to the hearing has a new exhibit to propose in accordance with 49 CFR section 845.9, it will not be admitted unless Chairwoman determines that good cause has been shown. Chairwoman Hamady, this concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much. We're ready to begin panel 4, Dr. Bauer. So please, please review the panel topics and introduce the technical panel and witnesses.
Thank you. Panel 4 will provide an overview of collision avoidance technology. We will address the following topics: description of collision avoidance technology, FAA requirements for collision avoidance technology for Class B airspace, difference between the traffic alert and collision avoidance system, known as TCAS, and airborne collision avoidance system, known as ACAS, difference between an ACAS and ADSB Traffic Advisory System, or known as ATAS. Pilot compliance rate with TCAS resolution advisories, including the current rate and what can be done to improve compliance, and reduction in nuisance traffic alerts and resolution advisories to improve the compliance rate. Description of TCAS version 7.0 and its inhibits, including resolution advisory inhibits and oral alert inhibits. A description of what collision avoidance technology the CRJ had on board to include TCAS configuration on the CRJ, the traffic display to the CRJ pilots, and any limitations. A description of the Army philosophy of collision avoidance technology, including Army use of ForeFlight for traffic awareness. A description of the results of TCAS and ACAS simulations using the geometry of this accident. Reduction of resolution advisory threshold and the effect that would have on operations in TCAS resolution advisory compliance. Evolution of ACAS and safety payback or benefit. ACAS XR for helicopters and ACAS XR standards. Combinations of technology solutions to mitigate the risk of future midair collisions. And ADSB in and out, the effect on aircraft onboard collision avoidance technology and operations. The NTSB technical panel, starting on my right after Mr. Banning, is composed of Captain Rocky Stone, an aviation accident investigator for air carrier operations. Mr. John Flynn, aerospace engineer, systems. Dr. William Bramble, a national resource specialist in human performance. Captain Van McKinney, aerospace engineer for helicopters. And Mr. Chahoon Shin, an aerospace engineer for helicopters, who is seated behind Captain McKinney. Witnesses for this panel are composed of the following individuals. From my left, nearest to board members. In the front row, we have Dr. Steve Kasner, an aviation human factors researcher and author and retired NASA Ames employee. Dr. Wes Olson, the leader of the Transportation Safety and Resilience Group at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Mr. Neil Suchi, a TCAS manager with the Federal Aviation Administration. Mr. Matt Haskin, with the FAA certification for avionics, communications, and surveillance with the Federal Aviation Administration. Mr. Michael Grease, the Senior Director for Certification and Airworthiness with Collins Aerospace, and Dr. Fabrice Kunze, the President of the Avidyne Corporation. In the second row, from left to right, we have Captain David Surridge, the Director of Air Traffic Management with American Airlines. Next is Captain Grant Clow, the Assistant Director for Flight Ops Tech with PSA Airlines. Next, Chief Warrant Officer David Van Vechten, Standardization Instructor Pilot with the Army Aviation Brigade. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Flanagan, Product Manager for Assured Aerospace Access Systems with the U.S. Army. And Ms. Stacy Rowland, the Director of Systems Engineering with Sage Tech. Chairwoman Hamidi, these witnesses have been pre-qualified and their respective experience and qualifications appear in the docket as exhibits. This concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bauer. I'll now ask the witnesses to please stand and raise your right hand. Please answer by saying, "I do." Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll give in this hearing will be the truth? Thank you. You may be seated. As a reminder to the witnesses, you'll remain under oath until the conclusion of the hearing. We ask that you answer the questions factually and avoid analysis. If you have any questions about if a question would be asking for analysis, please feel free to direct the question to me or the hearing officer. Finally, please push your microphone button to talk and then push it again when you're done. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Bauer, and the technical panel.
Thank you. We'll start with Captain Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Bauer. We're actually going to, human performance plays a central role in everything that we do in collision avoidance and aviation. So we're actually going to start our questions with Dr. William Bramble talking about human performance issues.
Thanks, Captain Stone. Actually, before I begin with our predetermined line of questioning today, I just wanted to follow up on something yesterday that was discussed with you, Mr. Van Vechten. The term vertigo came up, and I wanted to point out that that term is sometimes colloquially used to refer to the phenomenon of spatial disorientation, which is an inaccurate perception of attitude or trajectory. Such experiences are minor and transitory usually, but they're unfortunately common due to the fact that human senses did not evolve to correctly interpret the forces of flight. A 2002 U.S. Air Force survey found that 26.9% of pilots had experienced spatial disorientation in the month before the survey, and 58% had experienced it in the previous 6 months. And a 1975 study of naval helicopter pilots found that 56% had experienced one or more episodes of severe disorientation in flight. Mr. Van Vechten, have you ever experienced misleading sensations when maneuvering at night under NVGs?
Yes, I have.
How do you handle that when it occurs?
It's essential to cross-check your instruments and reference your primary would be your attitude indicator. Now, the only time this is really prevalent is when you don't have a visible horizon. Once spatial disorientation occurs, once you have the horizon, it almost immediately goes away for most pilots. And it's highly unlikely that both pilots would be spatially disoriented at the same time. So you can also transfer the controls to the other pilot, and most likely they are not spatially disoriented.
How are you supposed to communicate with your fellow pilot when that happens?
We have since changed our technique and procedures. There's a new term called uncaged, but prior to that, you would announce that you are spatially disoriented. Now, I need to mention that there are 3 different types of spatial disorientation. The first is recognize, where I understand something's not right. Maybe I feel like I'm spinning or I'm getting what's called the leans. That's recognized. Unrecognized is it's happening and I don't realize it, and then that could lead to incapacitating. The most dangerous would be unrecognized spatial disorientation because you don't know it's happening. So I'm sorry, going back to your original question again, I wanted to explain those 3. What was your original question?
How are you supposed to communicate?
Oh.
And I think you did.
Sorry, yes.
Does that usually resolve if you follow the protocols?
Yes, it should, because like I stated, it's highly unlikely that both pilots would be spatially disoriented at the same time. And it's usually unlikely to occur with a visible horizon. So that usually corrects the situation if you announce it and then transfer the controls.
Okay. All right, turning to Dr. Kasner.
Dr. Bramble, if you're going to raise that, can you yield for a second to me?
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Van Vechten, I just want to, along those lines of question, because Dr. Bramble raised it, at the time of the midair collision, there was a pilot flying in the left seat. That individual was flying at the time of the accident, correct?
Correct.
At the time of the dizzy comment, which pilot was flying? Do you know?
I'm trying to think back to the transcripts. I just went over this last night. It should have been the pilot. The pilot was, the instructor pilot was flying the aircraft.
That's correct. The pilot instructor was flying for 10 minutes from 1943 to 1953-39, which was confirmed by our recorders specialists.
And the reason it's a little confusing is because PI is the duty symbol we log, which is, but it's co-pilot. I know. And then the pilot in command was the instructor pilot, and that's PC.
Is it unusual that a pilot who would not be flying would also experience dizziness because they're not flying?
That's actually more common. So when I'm on the controls, like I stated yesterday, like demonstrating combat maneuvering flight or perform evasive maneuvers, several times I've had a co-pilot or pilot become sick and nauseated because of the maneuvers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Vecht. And back to you, Dr. Bramble.
Thanks. Those were some very helpful clarifications. Okay, Dr. Kasner, we're going to kick this off by talking about see and avoid, which has been discussed from the standpoint of air traffic management quite a bit over the last 2 days. But we haven't talked about the human factors of it that extensively. Can you describe the challenges of see and avoid from a pilot standpoint?
Certainly, as I pointed out the other day.
If you could just come a little closer to the mic.
Certainly. Our range of vision is actually quite narrow, as we talked about the other day, about 3 degrees. In a complex airspace, you have many directions you got to look in, up, down, and 180 degrees, maybe even 360 degrees. So it's a lot of real estate to cover with one narrow beam of attention.
Okay, and what does human factors research say about how good pilots are at detecting other airborne traffic that they aren't necessarily expecting to see?
Okay, that's highly dependent on how much information we're provided about where the potential threats could be. There's a classic study done about 35 years ago that asked pilots to just operate normally and were given no heads up at all about any intruder aircraft that might come their way. And what they found was pilots spotted just a little more than half of those intruder aircraft. And to be clear, they missed almost half of those, given no clues, given no heads up that anything was coming their way.
Wow. Why is it so hard to notice an intruder target?
Again, there's so many things to look at when flying an aircraft. You have the internal scene, instruments, the external scene, many things to think about. There's just a lot going on. And again, we have that ability to look at and think about one thing at a time.
What are the factors that attract our focal attention to an object in the environment typically?
Okay, that's where peripheral vision comes in. Motion is a very big cue for us. Everyone is familiar with the idea. They see something flickering or jittering in their periphery, it grabs our attention. We see it detected quite well.
Okay, when 2 aircraft are on a collision course flying a relatively steady heading, the opposite target will appear to be relatively stationary in the pilot's visual field. How would that impact the ability to detect the target?
That's going to make it very difficult. When something is approaching from the side, say a 90-degree angle, you get a lot of movement in your field of vision. When something is coming at you directly, it just doesn't seem to move very much. And that's a tough thing to see.
Mr. Fuchs, can you put up figure 30, please, from 2 Hilo A? Okay, so we reviewed some of the limitations of NVGs yesterday. Monochrome, this is the white phosphor version, so lack of color. How might that be a challenge in detecting airborne traffic?
Well, there are many challenges there. First of all, there's no color. So any aircraft that is oriented at an angle toward me, I'm not going to be able to see their navigation lights, the red and green navigation lights, which could help me understand how they're oriented and which direction they're coming. Also here, it makes it difficult to know what is what we were calling cultural lights, stars, and aircraft. We just discussed that an aircraft coming at you does not appear to move in the visual field. Well, neither does a star and neither does a building. So this makes it very, very much a challenge.
Okay. Mr. Van Vechten, those aircraft shown on the horizon in this image are about 4 or 5 miles away. Do they look any different than ground lights? In real life, can you make out the fuselages of those aircraft, or do they just appear as point lights?
Those just appear as point lights. It's very difficult to tell. It could be on a pole in the distance, could be a light. And because I'm so far away, I wouldn't have any motion like you stated, so I can't tell if it's moving. So that would be difficult to determine.
Okay. Can we pull up figure 29? Okay, so this is about a mile away. These are images taken from the green and the white NVGs. The acuity is reduced by the use of NVGs, so you see they look a little bit blurry. It's about 20/40 for the green, 20/25 for the white. Can you typically make out the shape of the aircraft at this distance?
No, I cannot.
Okay. How does that impact your ability to differentiate airborne targets from ground lights?
We have to use scanning and viewing with the naked eye. So continuously moving your head to try to get some type of relative motion to the object that you're looking at to determine if it's moving or if it's stationary, and then looking with the naked eye to possibly see an anti-collision light, or like the doctor stated, the red or green lights. So in aviation, we have a term, right on red return. So if you're looking at an aircraft and you see a red light on the right side, that means it's returning towards you. And that's how we use the red and the green position lights to determine the track of the aircraft.
But how do you do that when you're looking through the monochrome NVGs?
You have to look with the naked eye to try to see the red and green lights.
Do you usually flip the goggles up or tilt your head? Or?
No, you look side to side or look underneath the goggles.
Okay. Okay, so given the difficulty of detecting apparently motionless targets in the visual field, what is the role of expectancy, Dr. Kasner, in driving attention when operating in a dynamic environment and performing multiple tasks?
Well, here's where the idea of airport orientation, airspace orientation comes into play. If I have a familiarization with traffic patterns there, I'm going to know to direct my attention a little extra in those directions, more than I scan anywhere else. So knowing where to look, that is the key.
Okay, and what drives that knowing where to look?
Experience is one terrific source of that information. And if you don't have that, and the airspace is sufficiently complex, the airport, sometimes they'll prepare an airport qualification chart. And that's the FAA's opportunity to relate that information to the crew. Let me know where the problem areas are.
Okay. Is it fair to say that you need an accurate mental model of traffic patterns and movements to be able to anticipate the movement of airborne targets?
That's essential.
Okay. Do psychologists have a term for mistaking unusual patterns in the environment for more common patterns?
Well, loosely referred to as expectation bias, that if you're primed to be ready to see something and something pops up, you have a tendency to categorize it according to your expectation.
When does that tend to occur? When do people fall into that trap?
Well, it's when you, how do I phrase this? When the same thing happens over and over, you just encounter that so many times, gather so much experience with it, it tends to just sell itself to you that you're just so primed each time to expect that.
Is it fair to say that if you either don't receive information about what makes this event unusual, or you forget that information, that you're more likely to revert to the more common expectation?
That can be the case, yes.
Okay. All right, can we pull up 3G, page 57, Brian? So the FAA's PDARS study indicated that 4 to 7% of fixed wing arrivals landed runway 33 when DCA was in a north configuration in 2024, and about 93% landed runway 1. How would this pattern affect crew expectations about where to scan for traffic if they either did not hear or forgot that traffic was landing runway 33?
Well, it would seem to make it more challenging, and I would want to have all the information I could get if I was asked to do something unusual or something new.
Okay. Continuing with the discussion about expectations, I'm going to read some quotes from 3 12th Aviation Battalion pilots. We asked about their understanding of the protection provided by DC helicopter routes. A Chief Warrant Officer 2 said, maybe I just have too much trust in like what's printed in front of me, because I generally think that this is going to keep us safe. So if there's a traffic that's landing and Tower has them and we're on Route 4, the way I understand it is like we should be fine. It shouldn't be an issue. Another Chief Warrant Officer 2 said, was asked, would it be your assumption that if you stayed below the max altitude on Route 4 that you'd be safe from arriving traffic on 3-3? His answer was, yeah, that's why the routes are published, 200 feet and below. So you imagine that it's going to separate you from other traffic. A third pilot, who's actually the commander of the 12th Aviation Battalion, was asked, was it your understanding that if you stayed below the max altitude on Route 4 next to DC that you'd be safe from arriving commercial traffic? The commander answered,
Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
that I was reading was a statement from the commander, who was asked, was it your understanding that if you stayed below the max altitude on Route 4 next to DCA, that you would be safe from arriving commercial traffic? And the commander said, that's what the route altitudes are meant to do, to deconflict that traffic. Yes, sir. Dr. Kasner, how might these assumptions that we now know to be incorrect impact pilot scanning when traveling down Route 4?
I think it would provide a sense of safety and security there, and most likely result in a more relaxed scan, lesser scanning.
Okay, Mr. Van Vechten, how long did you fly UH-60s out of Davison Army Airfield?
From July of 2020 to July of 2024.
Okay, so about 4 years. How many times would you estimate you traversed helicopter Route 4?
Hundreds.
And how many times did you encounter airline traffic landing runway 33?
Less than 10.
Okay. You said yesterday that you were not intimately familiar with the approach path for runway 33 that airliners used. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If you were traveling south on Route 4, how would you know where to look for traffic landing 33?
You'd have to look at the approach end of the runway and then trace backwards to where you believe the aircraft would be coming from.
Okay, so you would extend sort of the center line of runway 33 imaginarily into the
That's a better, more technical way of saying it.
Okay. All right. Were you aware that it was a circling approach?
33 is a circling only?
Mm-hmm.
I was not aware of that.
Okay. And I think you mentioned something about an ILS, maybe an assumption that there was an ILS to 33.
I just assumed most, well, either ILS or GPS, I would assume, would be the most approaches that the fixed wing would be doing.
Okay.
Which would imply a straight in approach.
Okay. Dr. Kasner, given some of the limitations we've discussed, foresee and avoid, visual scanning, how can we best support pilots in seeing and avoiding other airborne traffic so they know where and when to monitor?
I would say to start out with a thorough familiarization with the airspace, just this sort of thing that we're discussing here. If there are other approaches, alternative approaches in use, especially circling approaches, have everyone know about that, all types of aircraft. Basically, being intimately familiar with the way business is done in that piece of airspace.
Okay. So you're talking about expectancy and knowing where and when to look by having an accurate mental model of what's going on.
Absolutely.
All right. So an additional redundant layer of protection might involve technological solutions. What is the role of collision avoidance technology?
Okay, that's the second sort of information that we can supply to the see and avoid process, where you're keeping a general vigilance for traffic, but then there happens to be a particular aircraft that you need to look at. So this is a way of providing information about where to look, what direction, what altitude to look, and it's known to be highly effective.
Okay, so there are different types of technologies for supporting traffic awareness. There are cockpit displays of traffic information, and there are traffic alerting systems, some of which provide merely advisory information, some of which provide directive guidance. Can you walk us through those different kinds of technologies and what purpose they serve?
Well, they all essentially inform the visual search process in the same way. Even the controller's advisory that you have traffic at, say, 1 o'clock, 500 above, that tells you where to point your eyes. Good evidence that you can portray that on a cockpit display. Pilots can look down at it and gather the same sort of information, project that flat display in the cockpit into the real world scene. And again, it's very effective. It speeds up the target acquisition on the part of the pilot.
So it aids in knowing where to look for a target.
Yeah, greatly so.
Okay. Even if you have maybe a little bit less than ideal amount of information about where that target should be, such as a vague communication from air traffic control?
Yeah, certainly. It literally tells you where to point your eyes.
Okay. Tell me about traffic alerting and what function that serves.
I guess I don't understand. A verbal alert, are we talking about?
So yeah, many of these traffic displays have both oral and visual alerts that will warn a pilot about traffic that could be a potential threat. From a cognitive standpoint or a perceptual standpoint, what is the purpose of providing those alerts?
Oh, once again, just tell you how to limit your search to the vicinity of the target. It literally tells you where to point that narrow visual flashlight beam that we all have. And we know there's a tremendous speed up associated with that when we do have the information.
Is it fair to say that if you are busy performing other aviation related tasks and you do not detect a potentially threatening target, that an oral alert could draw your attention to the display and indicate to you a threat that you need to search for?
Absolutely. That's its intended purpose.
Okay. And how much more quickly might you find a target if you are provided this type of technology as opposed to just looking for something unaided?
The studies out there generally find about an 8-to-1 speed up. So imagine a target that I would take 8 seconds to find completely unaided. Using a display like this or an alert like this, I can generally find that in 1 second. Or if it were to require 16 seconds, I can now maybe see it in 2 seconds. It's amazing.
That is a massive effect. Last question, Dr. Kasner, just wrapping up. You reviewed the docket for this accident investigation extensively. And from a human factors standpoint, do you see any design vulnerabilities in the system as a whole for preventing collisions between helicopters and fixed wing traffic near DCA?
Yeah, again, I'd start with the two sorts of information that I gave the opinion that really aid visual search is airspace familiarity. That's huge. Know exactly where the aircraft are. And then, of course, secondly, active use to the extent possible, collision avoidance systems.
Thank you very much. I'll pass the questioning on to Captain Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Bramble. I'm going to follow up Dr. Kasner with one more question. You talked about the importance of see and avoid or having situational awareness of where the traffic is to help you acquire the see and avoid. Can you give a comment on the effectiveness of a collision avoidance system, which doesn't rely on see and avoid at all? It provides guidance to the pilot on how to avoid a midair collision. So how would you contrast the effectiveness of a system like that versus see and avoid?
So just to clarify, are we talking about a resolution advisory or a traffic advisory?
A resolution advisory.
Okay, well, that's a very different thing. With a traffic advisory, even if you're looking for traffic on a display, it's still see and avoid. You're just seeing it somewhere else. But a resolution advisory, yeah, incredibly effective if it's trained properly. We know that when you get a resolution advisory, and for that to be effective, you need to turn your brain off. You need to not wonder why. You just do it, and that's a difficult thing.
Very, very well said. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to change subjects a little bit. I'm going to go to Dr. Kunze to talk about ADSB, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. And you know, we've thrown that term around a lot over the last couple days. And could you just give us a layman's explanation of what is ADSB out and in?
Yeah, I'll do my best. Automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, as you said, stands for, ADSB stands for those words. Every one of those words is actually important. It is automatic in the sense that it automatically broadcasts information. That is different than some of the other technologies out there where we rely on the interrogation from a radar on the ground, where then a transponder on board the aircraft replies. And that's how the location of aircraft is being measured. It is dependent because it requires the presence of a high accuracy navigation system. Usually this is a GPS system, but it doesn't have to be. What makes ADSB dependent is that we need that information to populate the fields in the message of ADSB. So if I broadcast my latitude and longitude, my ADSB system doesn't know my latitude and my longitude. I have to get that from somewhere else. And so therefore the system is dependent. It is surveillance. In other words, it isn't engine data. It isn't flight vehicle information system data. It is surveillance data. So latitude, longitude, altitude, velocities, aircraft information from a size and type perspective, flight ID, which is very helpful when you try to identify a particular aircraft. If air traffic control calls out, American Airlines, whatever number, you actually can now identify what aircraft that is being displayed and called out to you. And then lastly, broadcast, because it is broadcasting out that information. We often differentiate between ADSB out and ADSB in. ADSB out is the action of broadcasting this information from an aircraft. ADSB in is the action of then receiving that information on board my own aircraft from anyone else who might be broadcasting it. Now, there's a couple of important points to make here is when we say ADSB in, for example, just receiving the information is only the first step. What's more important is what we do with that data once we have it on the aircraft. We talked about the ability to display it to the pilot for situation awareness. We can use it for issuing alerts. We can use it to improve separation in the air. We can aid air traffic control functions. Yesterday we talked about flow-based, time-based flow management. We can improve spacing between aircraft. And it's really that ability, those applications that we wrap around that data that represents the fundamental transformation opportunity that we have with the air transportation system. Another thing to highlight here is ADSB in is only as good as your ADSB out equipage level. So if people aren't broadcasting, ADSB in isn't very useful. So it really matters that everybody else broadcasts ADSB out messages. And the last thing I highlight, in the United States, we have two frequencies for ADSB. One is called Universal Access Transceiver, or UAT, and the other one is 1090 Extended Squitter, 1090 ES for short. That unfortunately introduces some complexity in the system. So if I am broadcasting on UAT, someone with a 1090 ES system cannot hear my broadcast and vice versa. And so there are some systems on the ground that help with the translation of that, but that is system complexity that makes it difficult for some aircraft to hear others and vice versa.
Thank you. And I'm going to go back to the point you made just your second point ago, and that was it's critical how much equipage there is. And I'm going to go to Mr. Haskin and ask, what are the FAA requirements for ADSB out? When were they enacted and where do they apply?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so the ADSB requirements came into effect January of 2020, and they apply in various airspaces. Know how much detail you're looking for, but they unfortunately get rather complex about the different airspaces we require it. But for instance, certainly in Class B airspace, which is the focus of this hearing, it is a requirement.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to go back to Dr. Kunze, and can you talk about, you introduced kind of ADSB, and one of the most basic levels of how ADSB can be used is the ADSB Traffic Awareness System, or ATAS.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, and what is it, and how does it work?
Yeah, so one of the benefits of ADSB in is that it allows for a significant improvement in collision avoidance performance, collision avoidance system design. And there's a figure in Exhibit 2-Air-U uniform, page 2, that provides the larger context for collision avoidance systems, if we would be able to pull that up. When we talk about collision avoidance or conflict management more generally, there's an international framework that exists where and this is harmonized via ICAO. So this is a global framework that is used when it comes to keeping aircraft apart from each other. So this is the same in Europe, in Asia, in the United States. It's harmonized via ICAO, the UN body by the name of International Civil Aviation Organization. And it consists of 3 layers. The first layer is meant to keep aircraft apart by structuring the airspace and routes in a way that is inherently safe. That's the first layer. This is not something that really manifests during the flight itself, but it's something that happens primarily before the flight. The second layer is ATC separation or remain well clear actions by the pilot during the flight. We talked about this a lot yesterday. So our conflict probe, our air traffic control separation support is that middle layer. And then the last layer is the collision avoidance layer. So this is now the pilot, where the middle layer is air traffic control. The last layer is legally, squarely the responsibility of the pilot. And as Dr. Kasner said, this last layer is hard for the pilot to do just by vision. The see and avoid requirement there is hard. And so over the years, we've developed a large number of systems that support the pilot in the task of the visual acquisition or the avoidance of other aircraft. And those systems, they fall into 2 categories. We already mentioned them. The first category is a traffic alerting system. So this provides alerts to the pilot on where the aircraft is. It's usually what we call a yellow level alert. So it's a caution, which requires immediate attention by the pilot, but the pilot still needs to determine whether an action is actually necessary. And then the second category of systems is a collision avoidance system, which also provides an escape maneuver. So those are usually red level alerts, immediate attention by the pilot, immediate action by the pilot. And as I mentioned, it's directive. So it tells the pilot how to avoid a hazard or a conflict in midair. So this existed all before the introduction of ADSB, and it used a lot of the sensors that are used in these systems are effectively 1980s technology. So they ping, they interrogate other aircraft, they wait for a reply, they time how long that takes. That gives you an estimate of range. You watch range over time, and you can tell whether the aircraft is getting closer or not. Mind you, when you have range, you don't know if the aircraft is in front of you or behind you or wherever. You just have range. You have range rate by watching it over time. And in the reply from the aircraft, you get altitude. So you have 3 parameters: range, range rate, and altitude. And that's the information you have to decide whether you're going to avoid or try to do something about this aircraft in your vicinity. And this is where actually a lot of these systems struggle, because what you do when you design these types of systems, when you have that limited amount of information, you have to have fairly large protection values around the aircraft, because you don't really know where they are. And so these systems work well in an en route environment where aircraft are naturally far apart. But as aircraft get closer to each other in a terminal environment, these systems tend to have fairly large rates of undesirable alerts. They alert on aircraft that you know they are there, or air traffic control is providing separation. So you don't really want to hear alerts continuously as you get closer and closer to the airport. And this is where the introduction of ADSB really provides a significant improvement. You go from this very large volume around other aircraft to a very small, constrained environment where you now know latitude and longitude. Rather than a relative measurement, I have an absolute measurement. I know latitude, longitude, I know velocity, I know geometric altitude, I know pressure altitude, I know type of aircraft, I know direction because I know the heading of the aircraft. So now all of a sudden, we have an exquisite set of data that allows us to do alerting in ways that before we weren't able to do. And so that allowed us, and this was the genesis of the TCAS program, the Airborne Traffic Alerting System program. I was a grad student at the time at MIT, and the FAA, realizing this opportunity, came to MIT and asked if we would be willing to help them in the development of this first ADS-B-based collision alerting system. So to be clear, this is that first category. This is a traffic alerting system, not an avoidance system, a traffic alerting system. And so we started out with looking at the 10 years prior, all the midair collisions that had happened, to understand the dynamics, to understand the risk factors that actually lead to midair collisions. In fact, if you pull up slide probably 3 on that same exhibit, the high level results of how midair collisions happened, it was 112 NTSB reports that we reviewed for this. You can see on the left where the midair collisions actually happen. And much to my surprise, at least initially, almost 2/3 of midair collisions happen in the immediate vicinity of the airport. And then about the last third is away from the airport. And the geometry between those collisions is oftentimes aircraft going in the same direction. And so this was very informative because it allowed us to identify geometries that mattered from a design perspective in this TCAS system, and ultimately derive system requirements that drove the design for how to do collision alerting in the airport environment, where existing collision alerting systems at the time just had limited performance. And so from there, we went, did a large amount of flight tests. We did algorithm system development. In fact, the FAA's tech center helped us to fly helicopters. We did encounters between helicopters and fixed wing aircraft, two fixed wing aircraft approaching the same runway, small airplanes, fast airplanes, big airplanes, all the full trade space. That ultimately resulted in an RTCA standard. So this has been standardized. It has been harmonized with Europe. We have certified these systems, built them. There are thousands of them in the field. And as far as we know, there's currently, there hasn't been any one of those systems that has been involved in a midair collision, as far as we can tell, ever since we introduced this. And so the introduction of TCAS, the air traffic alerting system, has fixed that hole that we had in collision avoidance systems, where they had less performance in the terminal environment. We're still working on the TCAS version, which is the collision avoidance, the directive, the category 2 system. That's in work, but the TCAS system was finished on an FAA program about 10 years ago.
Great, thank you very much. And with that introduction, I'm gonna turn it over to Captain McKinney, and he's gonna talk about what the Army helicopter had on their aircraft.
Yes, that's correct. I'm going to focus on the traffic information technology available to the helicopter crew. So this question will be for Mr. Van Vechten, please. What types of traffic alerting systems were available to the helicopter crew?
Organic to the helicopter, none.
Okay, but they did have a electronic flight bag?
So electronic flight bag would include a personal electronic device such as an iPad, and that alone does not provide any type of traffic collision avoidance. It must be paired with another external device such as a Stratus.
Okay, and we know that the 12th Battalion had Stratus available to the air crews.
Yes, they were available.
Right, and we do believe they had a Stratus on board. Could you just describe all the capabilities of an electronic flight bag?
Sure. The electronic flight bag is primarily used as a digital flight information publication bag. So all of our publications that are required for flight, we can use it for a digital moving map. So in the Lima, where there's not organic multifunctional displays or MFDs with a moving map, we can use it for that. But it does have its limitations as well. We cannot use it for a primary means of navigation. It can assist, but it's not supposed to be primarily used for situational awareness. It's not to be referenced by the pilot on the controls. And it does have its limitations. So I brought one with me. If you can kind of see it, it kind of glares. I don't know if you can see it in the light, But one of the major limitations, especially while flying goggles and NVGs, it obviously produces light because it's lit up as a screen, and that can reflect off the pilot's windscreen and prevent you from actually being able to see outside.
Oh, that's interesting. Does each pilot carry a iPad EFB with them?
At least 2 are on each flight.
Okay. How about the crew chief?
Sometimes, if I'm doing an instrument flight where I don't necessarily need my iPad in flight as much, we may pass one back. So while the pilot on the controls is flying, maintaining altitude, heading, and airspeed, we will give the iPad to the crew chief in the back that can assist with airspace surveillance. And at altitude, we probably would have an ADSB in via the Stratus device.
Right. And you're not required to have the traffic or map display up all the time, right? You could have other types of information on the iPad being displayed when you're flying, such as a airport a reference or approach plate or something like that.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. But the ForeFlight does, and ForeFlight is the electronic flight bag that the Army uses.
No, it's not required to use a specific application. ForeFlight typically is the go-to application, though.
Okay, and the 12th Battalion was using ForeFlight on their iPads?
Yes, they were. They had a battalion ForeFlight account.
That's right. Okay. So if the flight crew had ForeFlight and the map was displayed, would that display provide any type of traffic awareness or alerting?
If it was paired to a Stratus device, you may see ADSB in data on your iPad via the icons.
Mm-hmm. And do air crews typically use it as a primary source of traffic identification?
No, we're not supposed to use that. It's prohibited from using as primary source of airspace deconfliction.
Okay. And typically, where do the pilot or co-pilot air crew keep the iPad during flight?
If it's being utilized, it's usually strapped to either the left or the right leg. It can be stowed in the door map pocket. It can be stored there. It can be in your pubs bag, which would be down by your side where it's readily available. We're not supposed to place it on the center console or have it unsecured or unstowed at any time. So usually the pilot on the controls would hit the button to turn off the screen so that it's not blinding you. And then if the pilot not on the controls needed it, they would be referencing it from one of their legs.
Okay. And you maybe covered this a little bit, but are there challenges and limitations using this equipment for traffic awareness and identification?
Well, yes, particularly while on the DC Helo routes, it's advised not to use it because we're flying VFR. So pilots' eyes should primarily be outside, especially when you're at low level, especially when you're under night vision goggles.
Mm-hmm. And the iPad, would that be even part of the scan for the flying pilot?
No, it's for the flying pilot. Absolutely not. It says shall not be referenced by the pilot on the controls.
Okay. And in your experience, how often have you noticed a ForeFlight traffic alert on the iPad?
Yes, we talked about this. So rarely, almost never. It happened once coming off of Baltimore, passing by Martin State. I got the little icon turn red and it kind of surprised me. So I took a screenshot of it and that's what I sent you because I'd never seen that before.
Right. And, for something like that, would you report that to the safety officer of your unit?
No, I was in comms with Martin State. They told me about the aircraft. I saw it. I think it got within 600 feet of going below me. I was on the helicopter route going from Baltimore to Aberdeen Proving Ground, and they were on the final approach course for the runway into Martin State. So we were all talking to tower. I was aware of them, and it wasn't unsafe. It was, I think, like I said, 600 feet below me.
Okay, thank you. And if you're using ForeFlight and you have a different page up, not the map, would you get a traffic alert on that page?
No, I don't believe so.
We talked a little bit about the UH-60 mic model. So that's quite a bit different than the 6D Lima model. Does the UH-60 Mike model have any type of traffic awareness technology on board?
So the Mike does, there are 6 of the 8 Mike models at Fort Belvoir that are equipped with TCAS. I had never used it. It's not in the operator's manual. I've never been trained on it. I recently started talking to pilots and they are starting to use it now. But other than those 6 Blackhawks in my 22 plus years of flying the 60, I've never seen TCAS.
Okay, so those 6, that's an additional equipment that's been installed on those particular aircraft. It's not fleet-wide, is that correct?
That's correct. And they have an AWR specific to those 6 tail numbers.
Okay, and the pilots flying those, are they being trained on that TCAS system?
When I was there, no, we did not turn it on. We did not utilize it. It was not in our operator's manual.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Captain Stone.
Thank you. I'm going to shift gears slightly to air carrier operations, and I'm going to go to Captain Surge. We've been talking about ADS-B and the ADS-B displays, and what I'd like you to do is to talk a little bit about the difference, because the basic traffic alert and collision avoidance system, or TCAS, has a traffic display. What makes the display that you are pioneering on your Airbus fleet different from the standard TCAS display?
Sure. If we could pull up exhibit 2 Air Whiskey. And I think that was the slide.
That was it.
Thank you. So in this slide right here, you can see the differences between what we call a navigational display that has TCAS on the left, and on the right, what we call this the aircraft guidance display. And between the two, there's differences. On the TCAS, you don't get directionality. So the arrows that you see on this screen are not the direction of the aircraft. It is just the fact that it's either climbing or descending. I can't tell you what direction those aircraft are going, but if I look on the right side, I can see the directionality of my aircraft in relationship to the directionality of the aircraft around me. I can see the range. In this case, it's at 2.5. And then I can also see that the flight ID. So I can positively identify the aircraft that are around me with a flight ID plus altitude to my altitude relational.
So let me follow up with, how would you contrast visually acquiring a target with your guidance display versus a standard TCAS display?
Well, this aircraft guidance display gives me instant information about the aircraft around me so that I can make different decisions. In this case, had the helicopter had this in front in their forward view and able to use this, and had the controller given the clearance pass behind 5342. If 5342 was up there, I could have positively identified 5342, and the helicopter would have known at that point that it was going directly towards that aircraft and needed to do a slight left turn.
And you could say the same thing for the aircraft. If they had this display, they would instantly know that the traffic was headed straight for them, as opposed to out in front of them somewhere. Is that?
So this is not a traffic collision avoidance tool like Dr. Kunze had talked about. This is more in the realm of helping the controller find where or helping the controller give clearances, and with those clearances, the pilots can make better decisions. Okay. So in this case, for the PSA aircraft, it was on a short final. Their attention would have been outside of the aircraft, looking at the runway. And so in this case, at that point in time, I would not consider this a tool that would effectively avoid a collision, just given the facts of this collision.
Okay, let's shift gears again a little bit to the last couple of days. We've been talking a lot about time-based flow management and how that works with air traffic control. And can you describe, as it is today, the pilot's role in time-based flow management?
Sure. Pretty much a pilot's role is nothing. We don't do anything when it comes to that.
Okay, so basically you're going to get controller instructions to maintain a speed or fly heading if you need to do a path stretch or something like that. So basically you're not involved in traffic flow management at all in today's world. And so my next question is, with the system that you have on your aircraft, do you have the ability to be a participant in the traffic flow management system, and how do you do that? How could it work?
Correct. And if you pull up the same exhibit, slide 5, one more, perfect. So this is the beauty of this technology, and that is that today a pilot is pretty much blind to their surroundings and to what's going on, and the controller leads them by the hand and tells them what to do, and the controller and the pilot does it. In this system, now the pilot becomes engaged with what the controller actually wants. And because of that, you can achieve spacing goals that you cannot achieve with TBFM alone. So if you look at the slides on the left, you'll see the top slide, it says 4 non-IM aircraft. Those aircraft were coming into Phoenix, Arizona on the trial that we performed between American and the FAA. And you can see the spacing in those aircraft. And then if you go to the second slide and you look on the left side, you can see those 3 aircraft as they went down the Eagle arrival. And their spacing is 5.8, 7.6, 6.4. If you go to the other on the slide 2, still on the right-hand side, you'll see those are 4 IM aircraft that are just starting to get lined up. Same controller working all of those aircraft.
And can you tell us what IM is?
I'm sorry about that. Interval management is IM. On the third slide, you'll see that those IM, interval management aircraft, the spacing of those aircraft is much more consistent, and it leads to better predictable spacing within the NAS. This is the extent of our trial, how far we were able to get. Unfortunately, the funding for that trial has been discontinued, and we were not able to continue the research that we were doing. And so the next step would be that we integrate TBFM sequencing so that the aircraft would have the necessary spacing. So when they enter the terminal area, the controller now, we could actually set it up where we would have breaks in this traffic so that they can sequence another class stream in the terminal area. So what we're trying to do with this technology is take the actual workload and start to bring it out into the en route part of the flight where it's not as busy, and setting up the terminal controller so that their job is easier, the sequencing in that airspace.
Great. On the right part of the display, you've got the guidance display. So how does the pilot maintain the spacing that air traffic control is assigning?
It's fairly simple. I've done quite a few of these over the last couple of years, and all I do is I follow that commanded speed. So that 210, that's all I have to do. So I go into, for my aircraft, it's called the FCU. I reach up, I select 210, and I'm done.
Okay, very good. And so your trial basically ended at the approach control boundary of the TRACON boundary. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to extend this a little bit further in the future. Is there an end state to this technology that we can run the airspace in a different way to achieve, a better, safer, more efficient spacing?
Yes, there absolutely is. And that's called flight interval management. And as we start to develop these technologies, again, it has the ability to look out hundreds of miles around the airport as flights are coming into this airport. And it has the ability to sequence and space these aircraft in such a way that what we call, we achieve very high RNAV conformances. You can only achieve this type of spacing and sequencing with a flight system that is looking at the winds on our aircraft. As you know, we have laser gyros, and they are able to give us exact speed information, and that information then is ingested into the algorithms in the box to produce the proper command speed.
And my last question on this, it's the FAA is about to invest a large amount of money in upgrading their infrastructure, very appropriately, I think. Do you know, do their future plans include putting a role for the aircraft in this traffic flow management arena, or do you know if they are planning to upgrade and continue operating the system as is?
I think we're very, we're just starting to look at the funding, and I have not been told that any of the funding will be directed towards this, but I'm hopeful that it will be.
Okay, appreciate that. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Flynn, who's going to talk a little bit about TCAS systems.
Hi, Mr. Haskins, can you tell us what are the current requirements for collision avoidance systems?
Yes, so I'll start with the transponder. The transponder is a fundamental part of the collision avoidance system, and that is required really in the same airspace as ADSB is required. And so for the purposes of this, I'll say it's required for all aircraft in Class B airspace. The actual collision avoidance systems themselves are not airspace dependent, but rather what operation you're conducting, what part you're conducting your operation under. So for Part 121, 125, and 129 aircraft, the TCAS 2 requirements are basically the same. And what they are is that if you have a turbine-powered airplane of more than 33,000 pounds maximum certificated takeoff weight, you have basically three methods of compliance to the TCAS rule. The first is having a TCAS 2 system that's version 7.0 or later. The second is we allow a TCAS 2 system of 6.04 if it was installed in your airplane before May 1st, 2003. And then the third is you can have a collision avoidance system that's capable of coordinating with units that are 6.04 capable.
Can you describe the differences between the 6.4 and the 7.1, 7.2?
So basically the three versions of TCAS are 6.04, 7.0, and 7.1. Different capabilities were added over time. I think some of my other colleagues, Mr. Suki or Dr. Olson, can probably speak to the differences in the development of those different versions better than I could.
Yes. 604 Alpha, the first iteration of collision avoidance introduced in the early 90s. Great performance, but as you roll out technology and get some experience with it, you realize there are some tweaks and modifications needed for extending from 604 Alpha to 7. Several change proposals were introduced. I mean, there were hundreds introduced into version 7, specifically to deal with nuisance alerting, a matter that we've been talking about a lot lately. So what really aided in 7 was the introduction of sense reversal logic, the introduction of horizontal misdistance filter, and then lastly, a real big one was the introduction of RVSM airspace and the tolerances associated with alerting at higher levels. And then when we go from 7 to 7.1, a lot of there were two changes, primary changes, specifically dealing with the Uberling incident where the sense reversal logic was extended for, there's a sort of relationship between paired aircraft to TCAS equipped aircraft. There was a reversal logic for the master aircraft. There were modifications to the slave reversal logic, and then also to the adjust vertical speed adjust enunciations where it required a reduction in vertical speed. We removed that to where it was just a simple level off zero command.
Thank you. Next question is for Mr. Flanagan. What are the Army requirements for collision avoidance systems?
So currently we don't have requirements on aircraft, but we have emerging operational needs because of the airspace we operate in that's inherently congested, low altitude, and that requires us to look at the emerging ACAS-X Aircraft Collision Avoidance System X software, which we're evaluating.
And I guess Mr. Olson or Mr. Sushi, are there differences in TCAS for a helicopter versus an airplane?
Certainly. So today, helicopters are equipping with TCAS 2. And there are no modifications to TCAS 2 for helicopters. Now, typically, they do not meet the vertical climb requirements of 1,500 feet per minute. There probably also may not be able to achieve the anticipated G loading during the response. And it's also the case that many helicopter operations occur below 1,000 feet AGL. And as we'll discuss later in this panel, I'm sure TCAS resolution advisories are inhibited below roughly 1,000 feet AGL. It also does not consider terrain or obstructions. So the FAA, and I believe that Mr. Suki will talk about this later, is developing ACAS-XR, as mentioned by the Army, that is specifically being designed for rotorcraft to operate and provide resolution advisories below 1,000 feet AGL to consider terrain obstructions when generating those maneuver guidance, and also to provide horizontal maneuvers in addition to vertical maneuvers to accommodate the lower vertical rate and be specifically tuned for that operational environment.
Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Captain Stone.
Thank you. And I'm going to continue with you, Dr. Olson. Dr. Kunze actually gave a very good explanation of kind of the differences between the situational awareness system and ATAS and collision avoidance system. And but I'd like to just have you go over really quickly how does the collision avoidance system, the current collision avoidance system, TCAS, work?
Certainly. So the existing TCAS system works primarily by first developing a picture of where the other aircraft nearby, we call that surveillance. So it sends an interrogation to the transponder on nearby aircraft, much like a toll transponder in your car, and those aircraft respond with our altitude. And based on, as Dr. Kunze described, the time of arrival, you can generate range and range rate. TCAS 2 also has a directional antenna, so you can estimate bearing nominally to plus or minus 9 degrees. And TCAS has very extensive heuristic logic, so if-then rules. If this happens, then the system should do that. It also has what we call trackers to take that information and not just say it's a bunch of dots, but to connect those dots into a track. So understanding that this is one aircraft operating. And based on those heuristic rules, based on the altitude of the aircraft, either above ground altitude or MSL, mean sea level altitude, it adjusts its alerting sensitivity, so how far away those aircraft are going to be. And it generates either traffic advisories, TAs, and this is based on a linear projection of my own ship trajectory as well as that other aircraft. And I should say this cycle of interrogation and replies is once per second. So every second, it updates the picture. It uses those rules to say, should I issue an alert or should I not? The first level of alerting is a caution alert. So that alert would tell the pilot the intended function is to have the pilot visually acquire the other traffic, to look out the window based on the traffic display, and also to prepare to respond. So quite often air carrier type aircraft, and I would also say that business jet aircraft, even though they're not required, as Mr. Haskins said, to equip, almost all of them have for insurance reasons. So they would perhaps disengage the autopilot or at least be prepared to do that to respond to the resolution advisory. If the range and range rate meet certain thresholds, then TCAS would see the need to generate a resolution advisory that would tell pilots to climb or descend, or to stop climbing or descending to mitigate that potential mid-air collision. And in doing so, TCAS would first determine should the aircraft move in an upward direction, or should the own aircraft maneuver in a downward direction. And then once it decides that, it decides whether or not, or the strength of that maneuver should be it to simply tell pilots to monitor their vertical speed, that is not to change their vertical profile or not to descend or climb as the case might be. It might be that level off RA that Mr. Suki talked about, or in the older versions, it would tell them to reduce their vertical rate, or it might tell them to climb or descend. And as the maneuver continues, TCAS continues to update itself once a second, and it can change its mind. It can reverse the direction it tells the pilot to perform that escape maneuver. So for example, it could, if the aircraft is the pilot's being instructed to climb, it could reverse one time into a descend based on the evolving situation. When the aircraft have passed each other past the closest point of approach, TCAS would enunciate clear of conflict to the flight crew, which would terminate the RA, the resolution advisory, and that's the basic operation. I guess one other important note is that if both aircraft have TCAS installed, those maneuvers are coordinated between the two aircraft. So one aircraft you think is the classic hallway problem, you're approaching somebody in the hallway, you both maneuver, you don't want that with aircraft. So one will pick going up, the other will pick going in the downward direction, or be instructed actually to go in the downward direction. Are there further questions?
No, that was a good explanation basic explanation of how TCAS works. So that's good. One of the issues that we talked about earlier was the prevalence of non-pertinent alerts or nuisance alerts. And could you describe, Dr. Olson, what is a nuisance alert?
I would say that this is a very difficult topic, both with the pilot community and the design community, to precisely define a nuisance alert. It would be one that is not desired by the flight crew, although that being said, quite often the flight crew is not aware of the criticality of the situation or the maneuver of the other aircraft. So really, post hoc, you can determine whether the alert would have been necessary or not. Operational experience shows that many, up to half of the resolution advisories are caused by 500-foot IFR, instrument flight rules, or VFR, visual flight rules separation. They're separated by 500 feet vertically in the National Airspace System. And that's standard, that's deemed safe. TCAS vertical alerting criteria is 650 feet at lower altitude. So every time a TCAS-equipped aircraft comes within closer proximity of a visual flight rules aircraft that's operating 500 feet below, a resolution advisory will be generated. It's also the case that many airports have what we call parallel runways. This is not the case at DCA as in this accident. But for example, if you've flown into San Francisco or Denver or Atlanta or Chicago, there are runways in the same direction, sometimes with fairly low levels of separation. That will be inside of TCAS alerting criteria, which would generate alerts. So at San Francisco, for example, where the runways are approximately 750 feet horizontally separated, that's well within the TCAS alerting thresholds, generating alerts that are unwanted by the pilots.
but quite often the pilot is not aware at the time whether it's a nuisance RA or not.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to transition briefly to Dr. Kasner. What is the effect of a high rate of nuisance alerts as far as, you know, the human ability to respond to an alert?
Well, we become desensitized to the alert. The alert ceases to be an alert. There's the likelihood that the alert is going to tell me something I don't already know in my mind just deteriorates. You get what's called the cry wolf effect, right from the Aesop fable.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Suchi. Do you have any data on what percentage of TCAS alerts would be considered nuisance alerts or could be considered nuisance alerts?
I could compare with the system that we've produced recently within our TCA, a TCAS-2 replacement. It's called ACAS XA, Airborne Collision Avoidance System XA. And its primary objective was to reduce so-called nuisance alerts and specifically tackle issues such as IFR, VFR interactions, as well as the 1,000-foot level off with an aircraft traversing above. Those are some primary use cases of what we typically hear of as nuisance alerts. And as far as the performance of ACAS XA versus that of TCAS-2, XA has reduced the number of alerts by over 65%. So a lot of these alerts would be the monitor vertical speed or your adjust vertical speed enunciations. But within that class of 65%, the deviation causing alerts, the climbs and descends, they were reduced by 35% with ACAS XA. Meanwhile, maintaining safety and actually improving safety by 20%. So it's hard to say a number on nuisance alerts because it's very subjective, like Dr. Olson mentioned, but I can only do that comparison of what system to sort of system performs.
Okay, thank you, and keep the mic because you're next up. I want to ask about so the result of nuisance alerts is kind of what Dr. Kasner described as the cry wolf effect of it goes off too often, so it doesn't get, we don't pay attention to it. And I do know that you do have data on TCAS resolution advisory compliance in the National Aerospace System. And can you share that with us?
Sure. And I think, again, if we're going to talk about compliance and RAs, we need to break them into some categories. There are RAs that require only sort of reduction in vertical speed where you maintain the direction you're flying. And that's the majority of the RAs that we see in the airspace. And they make up about 62% of the RAs we see. And we see high compliance in that respect, over 90%, because, you know, pilots are sort of doing and following the direction of what they're already doing. When we parse things out into a segment of the climb descends, you start getting variability in your compliance. Climbs and descends make about 20% of the RAs we see in the airspace. We see about 65% compliance for climbs and about 70% compliance with descend RAs. Unfortunately, when you start getting lower into the approach or final segment of arrival, below 2,000 feet, you see about a 30% compliance when you're with your descend RAs.
Can you tell us why?
I'm sorry, that's the climb RAs.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Why is the compliance so low in that environment? Because that's the critical phase of flight.
So in the United States, it if the pilot is able to make visual acquisition of the aircraft or threat aircraft, they're able to make a determination of see and avoid and safe flight, and they can ignore the RA and continue doing the operation safely as they determined. And so I can only sort of speculate in that respect as to compliance, and I can't go beyond that.
Well, don't speculate, but okay, I'm going to, how could, or how does, and we're going to talk more about ACAS in a minute, but how does ACAS, would it improve the pilot response rate to resolution advisories? And maybe that's a good one for Dr. Olson.
I think that in over time, we'll be able to determine that. If the assumption is that the high RA rate is what resolution advisory rate is what is driving noncompliance, then we would certainly expect it to go down as we reduce the number of overall alerts. If that is not the correct hypothesis, if there are other reasons, then it may not have as big a difference.
So I think you might have said that backwards. Like compliance will improve or increase.
Yes.
Okay.
We would expect it to.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Flynn to talk about TCAS functionality. Go ahead.
I'm going to add something really quick to that topic. From the perspective of ATAS, we saw a significant improvement in compliance with the pilots because the system was deemed more trustworthy. So when we only provide traffic alerts, I know that's different than a resolution advisory, but the improved performance that results from ADSB information results in the system being quieter, so that when it does go off, it has a startle effect almost, in the sense of, oh wow, I really got to listen now. And in our observation, the human factor studies that we did and in the field, people listen more as a result of that trust that is built in the system. At least we've observed that over the last 5 to 10 years.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Quincy. And Mr. Flynn.
Thank you. Mr. Grease, could you go over your presentation on TCAS, the symbology, and the different resolution and advisories and traffic advisories?
Sure.
That would be 9 Air G.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to provide a presentation on Airborne Traffic Alert and Collision Avoidance System, or TCAS. At the outset, I want to state that Collins Aerospace is dedicated to continuing to help advance aviation safety and is committed to assisting the NTSB with their investigative process. Next slide, please. So TCAS provides a backup separation assurance service secondary to air traffic control. TCAS's operation is specified by Technical Standard Order, or TSO, which is a performance standard defined by the FAA. The TCAS incorporates minimum operational performance standards that we refer to as MOPS, which provide detailed requirements as to the design and operation of TCAS. These MOPS were developed by the RTCA, which is a public-private partnership made up of various government and industry stakeholders to develop consensus standards. While developed by these stakeholders, the MOPS are ultimately approved by the FAA, and in this case, for the incident aircraft, TSO C119B. When a company like Collins develops a TCAS, it is required to implement the MOPS to ensure that its TCAS functions consistently and is interoperable across aircraft and airspace. The main function of TCAS is to track nearby aircraft and issue traffic advisories and resolution advisories. Traffic advisories, or TAs, provide situational awareness of nearby aircraft. Resolution advisories, or RAs, provide recommended maneuvers to increase or maintain separation from other aircraft. To provide TAs and RAs, TCAS obtains information from neighboring aircraft and analyzes that information based on its own internal collision avoidance logic. So first, a TCAS on the own aircraft would transmit an interrogation to another aircraft. And then that TCAS would receive a response from the other aircraft via that aircraft's transponder. Based on this response, TCAS calculates the range to and relative altitude of the other aircraft. TCAS also receives bearing information to the other aircraft through the own aircraft's directional antenna. Next slide, please. So TCAS then analyzes this information about other aircraft's range and altitude to determine whether the other aircraft will invade the protected area around the own aircraft within a prescribed period. TCAS repeats this analysis every second. These protected areas are represented by the purple and green rings on this slide. Purple represents the threshold area for traffic advisories, and green represents the threshold area for resolution advisories. Next slide, please. In addition to providing TAs and RAs, the TCAS system includes a traffic display. On the CRJ 700, this display appears on the multifunction display. To be clear, the display on this slide is just an example. It is not reflective of any of the display or data related to this incident. The pilots can set the range of the display to either 5, 10, 20, or 40 nautical miles. Further away aircraft appear as empty blue diamonds. As aircraft get within 6 nautical miles and 1,200 feet, the blue diamond will fill in. This is a visual tool for the pilots to indicate the aircraft is getting closer. On this slide, the aircraft represented by the unfilled blue diamond has a +10 next to it. That means 1,000 feet altitude difference, and the plus means the aircraft is above the own aircraft. The aircraft represented by the filled in blue diamond is marked with -10, meaning that that aircraft is 1,000 feet below the own aircraft. The down arrow indicates that the aircraft is descending by greater than 500 feet per minute. The aircraft with a yellow circle is subject to a traffic advisory. The notation next to it, -02, and an up arrow, means that the aircraft is 200 feet below the own aircraft and is climbing at a rate greater than 500 feet per minute. And then finally, the aircraft marked by the red square is subject to a resolution advisory. This aircraft has a +2 next to it, meaning that it is 200 feet above the own aircraft. Next slide, please. The traffic display that I just showed would appear on the multifunction display. However, the TAs and the RAs also appear on the primary flight display. This is an example of a TA on the primary flight display. Notice that in the bottom right corner, the word traffic appears in yellow. This indicates a traffic advisory. In addition, a traffic advisory will generally be accompanied by an oral alert that states the words traffic, traffic. Next slide, please. And here is an example of an RA on the primary flight display. Again, I would like to direct your attention to the bottom right corner. You see the word traffic in red indicates a resolution advisory. In addition, a red indicator arc and a green arc will appear on the vertical speed indicator. This indicates the pilot should adjust pitch to place the vertical speed indicator on the green arc. A resolution advisory will also be accompanied by an oral alert directing the pilot what resolution action to take. Next slide, please. Based on the technical standard order and the incorporated minimum operational performance standards, RAs are inhibited below certain altitudes. This graphic shows the inhibits at different altitudes, which vary depending on whether the aircraft is taking off or landing. Specifically, certain RAs are inhibited below 1,550 feet, and all RAs are inhibited below 1,000 feet. In addition, traffic advisory oral alerts are inhibited below 500 feet. This logic was developed by the RTC stakeholders after significant research and testing. The logic aims to provide appropriate collision avoidance while avoiding false positive advisories that may occur during takeoff and landing. The logic also avoids potentially unsafe advisories such as a resolution to descend when the aircraft is already at a low altitude. That concludes my presentation. Thank you, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you, Mr. Grease. I turn it back over to Captain Stone. He has a few questions.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Dr. Olson, So why are the TCAS inhibit altitudes where they are at today?
They're where they are today due to coordination within the community during the original implementation of TCAS. Prior to TCAS being installed on air carrier type aircraft in the early 90s, it went through what we call the Limited Implementation Program, or LIP. For those of you in the audience more familiar with operational test and evaluation, OT&E, or operational evaluation, it was just that. It was flown by participating air carriers with avionics companies providing the pre-certification avionics extensively around the U.S. National Airspace System, and based on pilot feedback, those altitude limits were set. I believe, I was not involved with this in 1980 something. But the feedback from the pilots was that they found some of the orals at lower altitudes, whether it was the traffic alerts below approximately 500 feet or the resolution advisories below approximately 1,000 feet, to be distracting and detrimental. So at coordination with the pilots union, the air carriers, and the community, the altitude inhibits were set the way that they are.
And I guess I want to follow that up with, and again, we're going to talk more about ACAS, ACAS XA shortly, but ACAS XA has the same inhibit limits, and isn't it true that those inhibit limits, part of the reason they're there is because of the technology that was available back in the 1980s to drive the alerting? It would lead to many, many nuisance alerts, just because the aircraft couldn't differentiate whether an aircraft is on the ground adjacent to the runway or whether they're actually an airborne threat. And I believe ACAS XA has the ability to solve that using the ADSB information.
I guess I would say that during the development of ACAS XA, and I would state that you are correct. At the time that the original TCAS was developed, MODES technology was not as widespread. That is more accurate and provides indication whether an aircraft is on the ground or in the air. Aircraft with older transponders, I won't use the technical term, it'll just be confusing. We'll call them older transponders. TCAS has to estimate whether they're on the ground or not, and that is not always accurate. So there was some number of nuisance or false TCAS resolution advisories due to an inability to estimate on the ground. So for example, if an aircraft with an older transponder was taxiing and stationary near the takeoff hold point, that could generate a resolution advisory. During the development of ACAS XA, this topic was discussed in our TCA, that standards body that develops the standards for ACAS XA as well as TCAS, in coordination with airline pilots unions, as well as the air carriers and air traffic control. The decision was made to leave the altitude inhibits for ACAS XA where they are for TCAS. It would also mitigate training issues. I would say that we have not collected data on how prevalent those nuisance RAs, resolution advisories, might be in the current environment. That would need to be done. There's also one complicating factor is that at least one particular manufacturer has implemented an automatic TCAS RA implementation, where the TCAS output is ingested by the auto flight system, and those resolution advisories are automatically enacted. So we would have to understand how that transitions the auto flight system into a different mode. So if you're flying an approach in an approach mode and you transition at low altitude out of that mode, that could be problematic. That would need to be studied as well. So the committee decided to leave the altitude inhibits where they are, but certainly I think that is worth studying again, in my opinion, and doing the studies to make sure it's both safe and effective, in the human factors studies to ensure that it's acceptable to the flight crew.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Flynn to talk about the accident and TCAS performance in the accident.
Thank you. Mr. Reese, the NTSB had asked Collins Aerospace to complete a TCAS model based on the geometry of the accident and the data provided from the accident. You did create some videos of what possibly would be displayed on the TCAS display. And we have those videos to show. Could you narrate them and describe them as they play? The first one will be 9 Air Charlie.
Of course. So I would like to, before we start the video, I'd like to kind of tell you what you're going to see before we actually start it, and then we'll start it, and I'll provide a little bit of narration over top. So Collins prepared these models of the TCAS display at the time of the incident based on the data provided by the NTSB. And I just want to be clear here, these are not actual representations, just like you said, John. The models show how TCAS would process and display the data provided to us by the NTSB. So this first video is of the TCAS display set to a 10 nautical mile range, which was the display range that the pilot had selected. This model shows only the UH-60. You will see the helicopter first appear as an unfilled blue diamond at the top of the 10 nautical mile range ring. As the helicopter gets closer to the own aircraft, it will fill in blue, and then it will eventually turn to a yellow circle as it gets even closer. That would then be accompanied by an oral traffic to indicate a traffic advisory. I would note too that this is a rather lengthy video, and because it shows the track of the UH-60 from about 10 nautical miles. So in the interest of time, if we want to kind of fast forward through some of that, I think we can do that. So if you want to please play the video. So the first thing we're going to see here is that the helicopter comes into range. As you can see it right now there, the open blue diamond, approximately 1,700 feet below the own aircraft. The up arrow there indicates that at that point it's climbing at a rate greater than 500 feet per minute. And coming up here when it gets into about 6 nautical miles or so, and I think it's at the point where it's at about 800 feet below, that'll change to a solid blue diamond. That's just an indication to the pilot that hey, this target's getting closer. So at this point, if you wanted to fast forward at about, I think it's about a minute. I think we had the cue set. There we go. Perfect. So now, as you can see, we're inside the 5 nautical mile ring. We're at a 400 feet altitude difference. Again, it's below the own aircraft. Again, the arrow indicates that it's climbing at a rate greater than 500 feet per minute. And now at this point,
traffic.
Now we have it changing to a traffic alert, and it changes to a solid yellow circle. Notice that the TA only is flashing in the upper right-hand corner. Okay.
And that was what was the range set for the pilot display.
That's correct. That's what the pilot's display was set to, was a 10 nautical mile range.
The captain.
Yes. Captain, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And then you also created a video at 5 nautical mile range for the co-pilot display. If we could play that as well, that is Delta and starting at time 120.
Yeah, so the next video here is of the TCAS display set to 5 nautical miles. That was the first officers or co-pilots TCAS. And we're going to start this video a ways in because it doesn't get close enough to be shown up on the 5 nautical mile display until it gets to that point. So you'll first see this at the top of the 5 nautical mile. At that point, it will already be a blue diamond. You can start the video. And you can see it just coming into view. So again, here we will, in a few moments, we'll see it change to a yellow circle, and that happens at about 1.5 miles.
Traffic.
Okay.
And those videos were done with only the UH-60 on the display.
Correct.
And you did do another video with the other traffic on the display.
Yeah, we did a second set of videos. This is the 10 nautical mile one, and it shows other traffic in the area. So we're showing the approximately last 60 seconds here. So what you got to be aware of is that the UH-60 is already inside the 5 nautical mile range, and it is represented by the blue diamond with the -04 underneath. And you can also see then if you want to start playing on this one. So you can see, so there's a couple other aircraft. There's one that's behind, and then there's one that is out in front at 10 nautical miles. So again, we're going to come in and we'll change to a yellow circle and have the traffic alert.
Traffic.
And then something I want to kind of highlight here is as we get closer, you're going to notice another bit of traffic pop up that is a departure aircraft from, I'm not sure which runway, but from one of the runways at DCA. And you can see it pop up right there, and it's out in front and climbing. Okay.
And with the symbology on the display with the diamonds, you really don't know the direction of the airplane or the traffic unless you monitor it, correct?
That's correct. You know the relative direction of it, and if you're watching it, you can see, relative to your own aircraft where that traffic is located. But if you're not monitoring it, then obviously you wouldn't be seeing that.
Okay. There's also, this was a bearing TA where the traffic was shown. What is a non-bearing TA?
So in the event that you would have a non-bearing traffic advisory or the directional antenna was not functioning for some reason, you wouldn't have the targets show up on the display. You would not have that icon. So you would have essentially no icons on the display, or you'd be absent certain icons depending on the situation. However, you would still get traffic advisories and if appropriate, resolution advisories. What you would see on the traffic display in that case is a little bit different. And I'm wondering if it's possible to go to 9 Air B on page 13. There's a picture of what that no bearing display would look like.
It's actually for the exhibit, it's page 14, figure 9.
So again, this is the case where you would have a no bearing TA. So there's an absence of an icon indicating the traffic. Down in the lower part of the display, you see TA 2 nautical miles minus 400. So that indicates that the location of the traffic is 2 miles away and that it is 400 feet below. And you would also get the TA only on the upper right-hand corner. And if appropriate, you would have a traffic annunciation as well.
Okay. Based on the geometry and where is the omnidirectional antenna located and where is the directional antenna located for TCAS?
So the directional antenna would be located on the top of the airplane, and the omnidirectional antenna would be located on the bottom of the airplane.
Based on Collins's experience with that airplane and those antenna locations and the geometry, what is your experience with the bearing TA versus a no bearing TA in that geometry?
So based on the relative geometries of the aircraft, and with the UH-60 being out in front and below, providing that all the equipment was functioning appropriately, we believe it's a high likelihood that there would have been a bearing target, that the directional antenna would have tracked that target, and we would have had that information available.
Okay. That's all I have. Captain Stone, you can.
Okay. So I'm going to go to Captain Clow. And when you get a traffic advisory, what are the pilot actions for responding to a traffic advisory?
Captain Stone, our guidance tells pilots not to maneuver based on the traffic advisory alone and to attempt to acquire the traffic visual out of the window.
Okay, what would you expect the flight crew to do when that traffic advisory goes off?
I would expect them to glance down at the MFD, as Dr. Kastner said, to get an idea of which window and what location to begin their scan, but it would be a brief glance and then looking out of the window to try and acquire that traffic.
So can you give us reasons as to why it may be difficult or why the pilots might not respond doing the tasks that you just described?
Well, so if I could speak to the difficulty first, again, as Dr. Kastner mentioned just earlier, that traffic coming straight towards you, which from the TCAS simulation we just watched, could have likely been where that traffic was. It's much more difficult to spot the traffic because there's no relative motion left to right, which would catch their attention. In terms of the reaction to the TA, first of all, I wouldn't necessarily expect a verbal response. PSA SOP does not require a verbal call out for a traffic advisory. And if I was the captain pilot flying and I saw the first officer lean forward in his seat and look out the window, I can see he's looking for traffic. Words would not be necessary it would be redundant at that point. I'd also like to state that this would have occurred at an extremely busy phase of flight. They would have had a number of other tasks that also needed to be prioritized. It is not possible to sit and stare and fixate on the looking for the traffic above all other priorities.
Okay, and actually I'm very glad you brought that up because I want to ask about pilot workload with the task that the crew was doing at the time, and they were circling to land runway 33. And we actually, and you helped us participate in a simulator study where we tried to quantify the pilot workload difference between going straight into runway 1 and flying the circle of runway 33. If we could bring up 2 error F, page 11. And as they're bringing that up, we had, unfortunately, it was not a full human factor study. We didn't have the time to do that. What we did is just a representative sample. We had 2 flight crews and we just put them through, flying the approach and had them evaluate how difficult it was to do the runway 33 approach versus the runway 1 approach. And actually, what I really want is not the Bedford scale, it's the results.
All right, I have those handy, actually. As Captain Stone mentioned, the crews were both trained, fully qualified, and current. in the airplane. They were pilots with PSA. One crew was quite familiar with the approach to runway 33. The other one was not. If you can put the scale up again, the first crew that was familiar with the approach and the airport, they rated the straight in approach to runway 1 as a 2. So basically low workload. And the second crew rated it as a 1, also a very low workload. And the first crew was then asked to perform the runway 33 approach, which breaks off from the runway 1. And they rated, the captain rated the difficulty of that approach as a 4.5. As you can see, that indicates sort of reduced capacity for additional tasks, and the first officer rated it a 3.5. When we played the ATC audio during these approaches, the ATC audio from the accident approach, the first crew rated it a 4.5 for the captain and a 3.5 for the first officer. And the second crew that was unfamiliar with the approach rated it a 5 for the captain and a 7 for the first officer. For the first crew, we actually paused the simulation at various points in the runway 33 approach and asked them to both rate the workload and comment on their activities, goals, and what they were focusing on. And the most high workload appropriate, and he was monitoring the precision approach path indicator on the left side of the runway to make sure that his vertical path was within limits. In the back of his mind, he was rehearsing the go-around, and because if he was unstable, then he would have to perform the go-around. The first officer said they had 2 heads-down tasks at this time. One was he had to make the 500-foot stable call-out, which would have occurred as they were kind of initiating that turn, and that involved looking at a number of different flight criteria to ensure that they were within parameters. As they turned final and they were aligning with the runway, he also needed to reset the speed bug from VREF plus 10 to VREF plus 4. And he also needed to back up the captain's monitoring of the PAPI, verify that the departing traffic on runway 1 that was crossing in front of them was clear, and that the departure end of runway 33 was clear. He had to perform a stable call out at 500 feet, but because the airplane was still turning and aligning with the runway, he had to continue monitoring to ensure that the approach was stable until they aligned with the runway around 300 feet. So he had a fairly heavy visual monitoring load going on there. Mr. Clow, based on your experience as an airline pilot and from observing these simulations, what is your sense of how the crew well, let me ask you this. What was the crew required to do in the event of a traffic alert in this situation?
As I mentioned earlier, they're instructed not to maneuver solely based on a traffic advisory, and they are to attempt to acquire the traffic visually out of the window.
Okay. And do you recall from the simulation work the relative position of the helicopter, whether it would have appeared to be below the crew's line of sight, overlapping with the city lights?
I don't recall that it was abundantly clear one way or the other. I think the captain remarked that the glare shield up on the first officer's side was possibly obscuring the area he was kind of expecting the traffic may have come from, but that's just my recollection of what the note said.
Okay, and we'll eventually have a precise visibility study looking at that, but generally speaking, if the helicopter was below the CRJ's altitude in front of it, would it have been in and amongst the city lights?
Yes, sir, I think that would be clear.
Okay. And if the crew had overheard the air traffic controller's transmissions to the helicopter asking if it had the CRJ in sight, and then heard the controller say pass behind the CRJ, and then heard the controller say visual separation approved, if you were in that situation, how would you interpret the traffic situation and whether or not you needed to do anything to avoid the helicopter?
Yeah, that's a good question. In putting myself in that situation, hearing the traffic oral, but immediately prior to that, according to the CVR transcript that we got to see when the docket was opened, immediately prior to the traffic oral was the ATC transmission that said, Pat 25, do you have the CRJ in sight? Then the traffic oral happened. And I believe, again, I keep referring to Dr. Kastner, but his testimony in panel 2, where the radio frequency is kind of like a party line, and all crews on that party line are listening to what's going on to build a mental picture of the traffic. I believe the PSA crew would have been listening with bated breath to what happened next. The next transmission was going to tell them whether the threat was mitigated and not something that they could deprioritize, or whether a control instruction from ATC would be forthcoming that they would need to react to.
Okay. Thank you for that, and pass the questioning back to Captain Stone.
Thank you, Dr. Bremel. I'm going to turn briefly to training for PSA pilots. So Captain Clow again. When do you do initial training about TCAS for your flight crews?
Yeah, so TCAS is trained in initial training, upgrade training, and recurrent continuing qual training.
Okay. So one of the things that we heard from Mr. Grease is that there was a possibility that there may not have been a target associated with this traffic call, the traffic alert, traffic advisory from TCAS. Do PSA pilots know about the possibility of a no-bearing traffic alert or resolution advisory?
Excuse me. Yeah, so in our initial training, there's an instructor-led systems class, and the training materials covered in that systems class include a depiction of the multifunction display where a no-bearing TA, how it would appear is indicated on that graphic.
And do you do any simulator training that shows a no-bearing TA or RA?
Yeah, unfortunately not. Talking with the simulator engineers that manage our simulators and other airline simulators in the Charlotte Training Center, the simulator is unable to generate a no-bearing TA in order for us to train it in the simulator.
So with the amount of
background that your crew had on the possibility of a no-bearing TA. If this was a no-bearing TA, what would that have caused as far as crew reaction? And maybe I might actually switch over to Dr. Kasner for this question. So now, they're getting a traffic alert oral, and they look down on the display, and there's no traffic that they can see. What kind of a human reaction is there to that situation?
Given the high workload of the situation, there's only so much time you could devote to that. I can imagine looking and not seeing anything egregious or imminent. I don't know what other choice there would be other than to return your attention to landing.
Okay. And back to Captain Clow, just one last question. Actually, two questions. How do PSA airline pilots become qualified to operate at Washington Reagan National Airport? Because it is what the FAA defines as a special qualification airport.
Yes, that is correct. DCA is a special qual airport. All PSA pilots qualify themselves to operate into and out of DCA via pictorial means, which is a FAA-approved method of doing that special qualifications training. I mean, obviously, if there's opportunities for pilots to transition through DCA on their initial operating experience training with the CheckM, and that's obviously a good thing, but it's not required. And I'd also like to state that we provide, think of it like a consolidated playbook of DCA-related guidance that we extract from all the different manuals and resources that we have as like an orientation guide for both new pilots and pilots that maybe have recently upgraded or have been away for a while to kind of refamiliarize themselves with information specific to DCA.
So regarding that, does any of that information that you just described contain any information about helicopter operations or helicopter routes in the DC area?
At the time of the accident, it did not.
Okay. Do you think it's important for pilots to know about the prevalence of helicopter operations and specifically what their potential routes are?
Again, hearing the expert testimony, Dr. Kastner again saying that kind of knowledge would be useful. I think it's certainly something that should be looked at. I don't think it's very simple to decide where to put that information. There are a ton of reference information already for DCA, and for example, providing a VFR type chart like I think it's called the Baltimore-Washington area helicopter route chart. That's not, we would have to find the appropriate method for displaying that. And I think we'd be very, very happy in participating in some kind of forum to figure out exactly what the best method for that would be.
Okay, thank you very much. Chairwoman Hamady, we're about to change subjects. Would now be an okay time for a break?
You're changing so I think Dr. Bauer and I have talked. How much longer do you all have?
My guess is an hour.
Oh.
We have a lot to go.
That is not what Dr. Bauer told me. So yes, now would be a great time for a break. We'll come back at noon.
Thank you.
Get it together, Dr. Bauer. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. You should not put that in the transcripts. please. All right. During our brief break, I think the technical panel decided they'd love to have the COO of the Air Traffic Organization as part of the witness group. So Mr. McIntosh, can you join us? I know you'll be over there. I think we'll have one witness leave, and so we can do some changing of seating. I'm sorry, it's so smooshed back there. And I do, just because you weren't on the other panels, if it's okay, I'll do the swearing. Raise your right hand. Please answer by saying I do. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this hearing will be the truth? Thank you very much. All right, back to the technical panel.
Thank you, and we're going to start off. I'm going to start off with Captain Surge. You talked about how you're using your interval management system to perform traffic flow management functions for arrivals into Phoenix. What I'd like you to do is to think about the DCA airport and a north flow at DCA where aircraft are primarily arriving runway 1. But in order to get departures out off of runway 1, there's a need to offload to runway 33. That's why ATC asks some of the regional jets if they're willing to take 33. And so I want to go back to your ADS-B system and the function that it does as far as interval management, and have you talk a little bit about how DCA could operate if they relied on using your system to help with traffic flow management. How would that work?
Sure, more than happy. So what we found in our trial was, first and foremost, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, was the ability to increase what we call the IAT, inter-aircraft timing. And that in turn allows us to, that was the first step. The second step that we want to start to do before our funding was taken down was we wanted to start looking at the sequencing capabilities of this system by using TBFM. And what our goal in that is to feed the initial terminal controller a class stream that allows that controller to do, it makes their job easier. The second thing that's out there, and this is again down the road, but we have what's called Terminal Flight Data Manager, FDM, TFDM. That starts to look at the airlines as they're starting to board the process. When is that aircraft going to depart the gate? Giving, and if you start, and it can feed into TBFM so that we can start looking at that whole sequence of events. And in DC in particular, what you could do is you could say, hey, we're going to have a departure here, start building a hold here. We also have different arrivals, class streams, build holds here. And by doing that, now you can start to get a much more efficient environment. And you, in theory, can bring more aircraft into a single runway.
So I think the key to what you're talking about is the precision of the inter-arrival spacing on final approach. Would you agree with that?
It is, and it goes into what's called CAVS and CAS, CDTI assisted separation. And that system gives a lot more information to the pilot, even from a safety perspective on wake, and also on just how they're converging onto the aircraft in front of them. What our data has shown is that when you give the pilot that extra data, they will bring the aircraft together closer, and also it reduces go-rounds.
Okay. I want to go back to DCA specifically on the north arrival flow. So if ATC wanted to get departures off runway 1, rather than offloading them arrivals from 1 to 3-3, they knew that in advance. They could just have you follow at a larger interval, and that would build the hole as opposed to having to offload to 3-3. Is that an accurate statement?
That is the theory of this, and that is an accurate statement to the theory, correct?
Okay. And I do want to go to Mr. McIntosh briefly. I know that you're in the process now of modernizing the air traffic management system. And in this upgrade, in this modernization, are you taking into account the future capabilities that aircraft will have that can assist you in achieving this task?
Yes, thank you. Absolutely. We're taking a look at what aircraft equipment is going to look like. That will definitely be a part of the airspace modernization. But quite honestly, what we really need is we need all the stakeholders to play. We need to see majority of our aircraft to have the type of equipage that would pull this off. Speaking about interval management that Dave is speaking to, we really need to be able to make sure that we've got the appropriate fleet equipage that can actually do this at the appropriate times versus just certain aircraft. So to your point, if we have a regional jet and an Airbus and a Boeing 737, we want to be able to start building that interval management between all those aircraft, and not just with one carrier, but we need all the carriers that will be able to play when we go to an airport like DCA that has multiple air carriers going into it at one time.
So how does the FAA get multiple players to play? What would be required to do that?
I think we'd start off with the CDM process, the collaborative decision-making process, and also meet with the carriers via a NAS advisory board, make sure that everybody understands where we want to go. And to start taking advantage of these capabilities, we really need to have the equipage in that whole entire fleet to pull this off, like I said before.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to transition over to changing subjects again slightly. We asked the FAA to perform a number of simulations based on this accident, with using different assumptions for what TCAS could possibly do with if it was designed, or the inhibits were different, and actually we also wanted to look at ACAS with the same issues. And so what I'd like to do now is go to Mr. Suki and have you, I think you have a brief 2-slide presentation on what the simulations were and how you did them. And then after that, I'll ask you questions to walk through the results of those simulations.
Yes, it's Exhibit 2, Alpha India Romeo Victor. And you can go to the next slide. So yes, my team was approached by the NTSB in April and asked if we could simulate the DCA encounter trajectories, and in doing so, manipulate several variables to see if it had any difference or effect on the simulation results. Variables we simulated were the surveillance driving the equipment. We used the DCA radar. It's 4.7, it's course data, 4.7 second update rates. We additionally used some data we were provided from the NTSB. We consider this, call it truth data. It's more resemblant of ADSB and the actual trajectories the aircraft flew. Second variable we manipulated was the collision avoidance equipage on the CRJ. We used a surrogate for what was on the CRJ, which was a 7.0 version of TCAS logic. Our simulation is hardwired with a TCAS version 7.1 logic. We had discussions on the changes that were made between 7.1. They wouldn't have any bearing on the event or encounter of we're addressing here. So it was decided that we're all comfortable using version 7.1 as a representative surrogate for the 7.0. Secondly, we used a modified version of the 7.1 logic where we actually reduced the resolution advisory thresholds on the from 900 feet down to 400 feet. Thirdly, we did a iteration of the logic where we were talking about the bearingless bottom omni-only antenna surveillance feed to see if it had any bearing on the simulation results. And then we transitioned to the TCAS replacement, the ACAS XA logic. As alluded to previously, the XA logic was developed to reduce nuisance alerts as well as ingest and take advantage of new surveillance, specifically ADSB. However, the design objectives associated with the inhibits are the same as current TCAS. So we wanted to see how simulation results varied when we ran XA. And then with that, we also lowered the altitude inhibits on the XA logic to see from the 900 to the 400 to see what effect. Thirdly, we changed the equipage on the collision avoidance equipage on the UH-60 from not having any to a prototype system that's currently being developed within our TCA. It's a standards body. Special Committee 147 is currently working on it with minimum performance standards projected to be completed next year. And so there was a prototype version of XR that we added to the UH-60. And then lastly, we changed the quantization, the altitude quantization that we're using to feed the collision avoidance from the 25-foot increments versus 100-foot increments. So in total, there were 15 total test configurations, and we did 100 iterations on each of those test configurations. And again, what we wanted to do, and what I'm going to show later, are the mean, or sort of the average results from timing as well as missed distance, vertically and horizontally.
If you could bring up Exhibit 2, Arrow Gulf, page 36. And in the interest of time, Mr. Suchi, what I'd like is, let's start with, or maybe run through number 6 on.
Okay. Sure. Well, so in general, what we found is that both TCAS and XA, as designed with their current inhibits, would have only provided a traffic alert prior to the collision, but neither would have provided a resolution advisory. In order to get that resolution advisory, you would have to lower the inhibits to the encounters. And as alluded to previously, someone mentioned, I don't remember who, but the early development of TCAS, the inhibits for resolution advisories were at 500 feet. And I think we've had that discussion as to why they ended up being raised to 1,000 feet. When we looked specifically at the quantization bearingless, it didn't really have any effect on timing. And I think I'll walk through those results. Then lastly, the use of the prototype of XR on the helicopter did significantly reduce the collision risk without actually having to change existing design of TCAS or ACAS XA. Now, So to go through the results using we're going to focus on the data from the NTSB, the truth data. When we look at runs 6 and 7, it's using TCAS as is with the inhibits where they are. We varied the quantization from 100 to 25 feet. And when we look across the results, the quantization of the altitude had no effect on the average TA timing. So it basically concluded or confirmed that, approximately 20 seconds or so prior to CPA that you would have gotten a TA though. Run 8, where we assessed the bottom antenna, bearingless only Omni input. It didn't have any effect on the timing of the TA. It would have been an effect on the display to the pilot. I think that was discussed already, where if you had bearing, you would have seen the yellow circle. Without bearing, you would have got traffic alert symbol or wording text on the bottom of the display center without an indication of where the threat aircraft would be. All right, so when we'll get into modifying and lowering the RA thresholds for current TCAS from 900 feet to 400 feet. What we see is the timing on the for the TA, and this is a simulation, actually, in order to lower the thresholds for TCAS, we weren't able to go in and physically change the rules and heuristics of the logic. We actually raised the altitude flown from the surveillance data we were given. And so it's actually being assessed in a sensitivity level 3 versus a sensitivity level 2. So you see a little variation in the timing, but the point here is more on the RA timing, and you would have gotten an RA about 14 seconds prior to closest point of approach with about anywhere from 300 to 327 feet in vertical mist distance. And so you see a slight variation in quantization being fed to the system as to the ultimate mean distance you get with vertical separation. So a little better actual separation with 100-foot quantization than with the 25-foot. Now, getting into the XA runs 11 and 12, it's, again, the inhibits are at the same level as current TCAS design. However, you do get a earlier average traffic alert time. So about 27 to 28 seconds prior to closest point of approach, you would get a TA, where you were seeing previously the 20 seconds. So you get about a 7-second additional lead time on the traffic alert. But however, it doesn't assist because it's, the event was lower than the resolution advisory threshold or inhibit boundaries. When you modify the ACAS-X logic, you do, again, see similar performance like you did with doing the same thing for TCAS. Again, a little earlier mean time for the traffic alert. We're around 28 seconds. And you get a RA about 17 seconds prior to closest approach with vertical separation. And again, the quantization adds a little variation in the vertical mist distance. But you achieve about 400 to 420 feet vertical mist distance with modified XA. And then lastly, we used TCAS with 100-foot quantization and added the XR functionality on the UH-60. You get, again, similar for the CRJ TA around 20 seconds. You get for the UH-60, the simulation results show a TA around 73 seconds. You get no RA again with the TCAS CRJ. You get an RA about 28 seconds prior to closest point of approach, and your vertical and horizontal, well, your horizontal miss distance is about 2,200 feet, and your vertical miss distance is about 110 feet.
Thank you. I did want to point out that all these simulations assume 100% compliance with the resolution advisory, which in today's world, it doesn't happen. Hopefully in the future world with the reduced nuisance alerts, we'll get much higher compliance. And one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit more is the whole premise of ACAS and why ACAS was developed as a follow-on to TCAS. I'm going to go to Dr. Olson for this. What is the actual difference, or what's improving in ACAS versus TCAS?
So first, I would like to just say, from a history standpoint, at Lincoln Laboratory, we came up with an initial concept for improving collision avoidance using machine learning. And the FAA, through the TCAS program office with Mr. Suki, funded that activity very early on to improve collision avoidance, to adapt it for the future. There was a study within our TCA, the standards body, to look at the future of collision avoidance. There were complaints from operators about the excessive nuisance alert rate. And so our TCA Special Committee 147 that does the collision avoidance work determined whether or not TCAS was adaptable for the future or whether a new approach was needed. The conclusion was a new approach was needed that would account for platforms, the lower climb and descent performance, improve surveillance, and closer density operations. So ACAS X as a concept was developed to be modular, whereas TCAS, that interrogation and reply that was discussed several times, is tightly coupled to the logic. We wanted to ingest new surveillance sources for crewed aircraft. We're looking at ADSB, the automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, but decoupling that would also allow for uncrewed aircraft to use perhaps a primary radar or a ground-based radar or electro-optical sources, whatever was appropriate to drive the alerting and the guidance logic. So the approach in general is to take that surveillance and to account for surveillance uncertainty. So Dr. Kunze already discussed there is greater uncertainty with the interrogation reply than with ADSB, and these other surveillance sources also have uncertainty, but there's also maneuver uncertainty. So the other aircraft may suddenly maneuver in a direction that you don't encounter, you don't expect. So for example, in an encounter with a non-TCAS or ACAS equipped aircraft, they may, via detect and avoid, see the aircraft maneuver, but in the same direction. So we need to account for that maneuver uncertainty. So using machine learning techniques and an extensive amount of data, radar data, and also through the TCAS program office, who collects information on TCAS resolution advisories, the radar tracks for the own ship and the intruder, as well as the types and the nature of the RAs. We use that through machine learning techniques to tune a logic with specific objectives to reduce nuisance alerts. So we focused extensively on the 500-foot separation between instrument flight rules and visual flight rules on parallel approaches, and also iterated that with the community through our TCA. We conducted 2 flight tests in conjunction with the Federal Aviation Administration at the William J. Hughes Technical Center. And we also had an operational evaluation of the final product by putting it on 10 aircraft and flying around the U.S. national airspace. So tuning, observing the output in modeling and simulation. So we simulated hundreds of billions of encounters, safety critical encounters, as well as using radar data from across the entire U.S. national airspace provided by the MITRE Corporation to understand the alerting at specific airports, specific altitude bands, as well as the safety across a wide number of encounters. And the resulting logic through that machine learning is instantiated on a lookup table that goes on the aircraft, the same form, fit, function of a TCAS unit. And the initial version was ACAS XA. It also provided provisions for what we call ACAS XO, or operation-specific alerting, using that ADSBN technology that Captain Stone talked about to designate an aircraft, perhaps on a parallel runway, provide different types of alerts or no alerting at all in the case of visual separation operations. And we've developed since then through our TCA with funding from Mr. Suki and the Federal Aviation Administration and participation by Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab, who's been a strong partner in this development. Versions for larger UAS called ACAS XU, version for smaller UAS or drones, if you will, ACAS SXU and ACAS XR, which is relevant to this discussion. For rotorcraft, both crewed rotorcraft as well as more autonomous or uncrewed rotorcraft, maybe eVTOLs, advanced air mobility or burn air mobility of the future.
And can I get you to, the one that you left out, I think is ACAS XO. And I'm keenly interested in ACAS XO because the idea of it is to suppress alerts in those situations where you have close to space parallel runways, which is, I think, a large number of the nuisance alerts we get today are in those kind of situations. And how would you describe the evolution of ACAS XO and where does it need to go?
So the flexibility of the ACAS X approach and be able to tune differently for different types of operations. Earlier on in the development of ACAS X, the community identified a number of areas of concern, and closely spaced parallel approaches was one of those areas. But I would point out this technique of providing differential alert for any special operation is adaptable for the future. So for example, if there were rotorcraft operations that were very different, we can use that same technique in designating aircraft, specific aircraft, to treat them differently. For ACAS XO, the initial implementation was oriented towards parallel runways with two applications. One was for what we call the CSPO, closely spaced parallel operations mode, for runway separations down to 3,000 feet, which would be in instrument meteorological conditions that reduce the volume protected. You can think of it that way. That's not really the underlying technical approach, but you can think of it conceptually, reducing the alerting volume to minimize nuisance alerts on parallel runway monitoring PRM approaches that are currently being conducted today. The other area was the realization that most of the parallel approach operations are conducted in visual conditions, and that pilots could use the ADS-BN functionality to designate another aircraft and receive no alerts at all on that aircraft, receiving full protection against every other aircraft. So if there was a helicopter or a GA aircraft or an aircraft on a different runway that was blundering through, you would still get the full protection against that aircraft. So that was the initial application, but it could be expanded to other applications if they were defined by the community with the safety objectives and the alerting objectives.
And last question on ACAS is, what is the state of ACAS standards and implementation?
I can answer part of that, although I think that's really maybe more appropriate for Mr. Haskins, since that implementation is really an FAA matter. Mr. Haskins, I can address that, or you could.
No, I can say it. So we have a technical standard order, which is the document we use to certify. We have that published for ACAS XA. That was published back in 2020. To date, we have not certified any equipment under that technical standard order. As far as ACAS XR goes, which I guess we're going to get into, but it's something we're keenly interested in. We're going to treat that as a very high priority, and we're going to publish that technical standard order as soon as we can after the RTCA body finishes the standards development. We think we can do that within 3 to 4 months.
And with that, I'm actually going to turn it back over to Mr. Flynn to talk about ACAS XR.
Thank you. Dr. Olson, so ACAS X, is it only dependent on ADS-B?
So it depends which variant you're talking about. But for ACAS XA and for ACAS XR, the intention is to use both the ADS-B information as well as the standard TCAS style interrogation and reply. And the way the system works is it uses that ADS-B information as long as it is validated. So as long as it matches the bearing and range of the TCAS interrogation reply, and that's to mitigate against inaccurate or spoofed ADS-B information.
Okay. So if ADS-B is inoperative on an airplane, the accuracy of ACAS will be degraded?
Mr. Suki, you had a, no, okay. The accuracy, so we tune the logic to be just as safe, whether it's using ADSB information or whether it is only using, in quotes, the interrogation reply information. The alert rate is slightly higher if there is no ADSB information, but it's very important since many of the operators who are equipped with TCAS encounter non-ADSB out aircraft in the current environment. And I would also point out that collision avoidance is standardized across the world. The International Civil Aviation Organization, Mr. Suki, has worked with that organization over the last 15 years to ensure that ACAS-X is incorporated into those worldwide standards. And many of the nation states in the world do not have the same ADSB out equipage as the US does. So it's very important to ensure that the system works without ADSB out information. It'll be just as safe, but we'll alert more often.
Okay. I guess this question is for Mr. Flanagan and Mr. Rowland. You mentioned about equipping Army helicopters with TCAS or ACAS. What are the issues with incorporating that on older platforms like the UH-60?
So for today, right now we don't have a transponder. There's not even a standard that exists for doing ACAS-X on our platform. So that's our today challenge. Going forward, the only thing that would could you repeat the question?
I guess what are the challenges you face incorporating ACAS-X on your fleet of helicopters?
We have to have the hardware there to put it on, and we're on track to have that hardware start fielding in a couple of years.
If you'd like, I do have a few slides that might help to illustrate this. If you could go to AR Oscar, I believe is the letter on it, and go to slide 5, page 5. So these 3 pictures, the left one is just a conceptual installation. The unit, of course, needs to be there, and as Mr. Haskin pointed out earlier, transponder and the ACAS computer are part of the system. We already have prototypes of the ACAS XR that we are testing currently. That prototype does include 2 separate units. We are implementing the software of the ACAS so that it will work on a newer hardware platform that we're developing for the Army for their Mode S IFF transponder obsolescence replacement. The installation also includes a display, and it is very likely they will be able to use the same display, that it would require an FMS update to receive the data from the ACAS and provide that information to the display. If you look to the center picture, this is what our ACAS XR system will look like. Transponder, ACAS-X, all in one, ADSB in, ADSB out, everything's there. One of the important parts of this is that it will operate with 2 omnidirectional antennas. Traditional TCAS systems required at least 1 directional antenna. On a helicopter, it is sometimes, well, I would say almost always difficult and sometimes problematic to find a location to mount the antenna. And even if you do get a directional antenna mounted, there's interfering components that can compromise the integrity of the bearing measurements that you would get with that antenna. So this system, the ACAS XR, is being designed in the industry standards committees to operate with omnidirectional antennas only, which facilitates, simplifies the installation. On the right side picture, this is just it's our flight test evaluation kit, just to kind of exemplify how simple, I guess you could say, the system can work. It's self-enclosed, battery operated.
We can take this onto an aircraft or operate it on a bench, connect it to a GPS puck for own aircraft information. Works with an iPad display, which of course is for demonstration purposes only. The antennas can connect, and for our, sometimes with the flight test, we'll just have a suction cup antenna. We don't operate it as part of the aircraft system, but just to demonstrate it. Self-contained battery operated, and you can evaluate the system very simply. If you go to the next page, for the Army project that we're working on right now to replace the obsolete Modus IFF transponders, we're developing what we call our micro common transponder. And this is a plug-in replacement for the transponder that is already there. Meaning it's form, fit, function. You take one out and put the new unit in. So we've mounted our low size weight power unit inside of this container so that it will fit directly in the aircraft the way the other one does. With that, our design of our product, as I've indicated, is designed such that ACAS XR upgrade to that unit is software only. Now, if you go to the next slide, this just shows a installation overview of the system. And in blue, you see the solid blue box there that says the update needed for ACAS X. And then if you look down, anything that's light blue in that basic installation diagram are areas that would need to change to go from the transponder version to the version with the ACAS XR. And that includes, of course, the upgrade for the XR software itself. It includes the oral data, which there's already an audio bus, so it's assuming that we can just put the additional oral on the bus and use the existing interface on the aircraft. It also includes the display interface, the intruder data, the resolution advisory data would come out on an existing bus going to the FMS. And then, of course, it would require an update to the FMS to be able to process that additional data and display it. So while not trivial, it is very straightforward and a doable implementation.
If I might add, the reason I asked you to repeat the question is because you said a challenge. I see it more as an opportunity. I'm a PM, so I have to be optimistic, but I'm like, okay, it's an opportunity from our perspective.
Okay. I guess you did answer all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, we're getting close to the end, which is good. I do have a question for Mr. Suki, and that's, can you tell us what your plans are for future ACAS standards development? Where are we at and where are we going?
Yes, as mentioned previously, we're working to complete the standards for ACAS XR within our TCA Special Committee 147 by late spring of next year, in order for them to be published by the Program Management Committee of our TCA, become a published standard from which then the regulator will move forward with their technical standard order. And currently right now, at the conclusion of that, there are no more plans. We are internally strategizing and potentially trying to seek resources to support a limited implementation program or something along those lines for XR, but that has not been formalized.
Any plans for a limited implementation program with ACAS XA?
We had completed an op-eval already, as Dr. Olson mentioned, where we equipped 10 aircraft with 2 different vendor equipment and flew it for over a year across the NAS.
Thank you. And one last question for Colonel Flanagan. Is the Army, do you have any plans for beyond what you're doing? I mean, you're looking at what the ACAS XR standards are, and it seems as though you've already picked a transponder that is potentially upgradable. Is there any other future plans in the Army as far as collision avoidance systems that would allow you the airspace access that's in your job title?
So I think where you might be going with this is our motivation isn't just civil airspace. So being the Army, we have a imperative to operate in tactical airspace, which our previous mission was low altitude, congested. And it's a recurring challenge to safely operate in those environments. So we have a tactical imperative in addition to a civil imperative to have this technology on board. Is that what you're going after?
Yes, thank you very much.
I have a couple of questions. For the FAA, can you require military aircraft to be equipped with collision avoidance technologies?
So for instance, the transponder and the ADSB requirements are done by airspace. So anybody that's flying within the airspace where those are required, have to equip with those technologies. So we could require collision avoidance in a similar fashion, and then the military would be expected to comply in that airspace. Today, the collision avoidance requirements are by the parts they're operating under, and the military do not operate under those parts. Therefore, they currently have no collision avoidance requirements from the FAA.
If I could just add, I think I was in the Air Force at the time the original TCAS requirements came in, which was the result of a midair collision as well as some other incidents, and that was a DoD directive to equip troop and passenger carrying aircraft in certain classes and categories with TCAS. So that was in the late 90s.
And with and this question's for the Army, for collision avoidance technologies that will use ADSB, probably for Colonel Flanagan, how would this affect Army policy in use of ADSB in civil airspace?
So ADSB, not just the Army, but DoD has concerns that I'm pretty sure most people are aware of, the fact that it's inherently open source. It has some spoofing vulnerabilities, which make it non-conducive for those sensitive missions, which not just the Army, but all of DoD has to operate on. So in civil airspace, when there's traffic information systems broadcast, TSB network, the Army can comply with mode 3 Alpha Charlie emissions and feed into that fused picture. So anybody who has a tie-in for the TSB network has the awareness. On non-sensitive missions, there's obviously not an issue with complying. I would offer a little bit more expansive. We are mindful of the additional details which are available. And another aspect of the micro common transponder that Mr. Rowland mentioned is the capability to do mode 5 level 2 Bravo, which is essentially ADSB information, but using mode 5 level encryption. And that enables us to operate again in the tactical environment that we're focused on as a military.
Mr. Shin, could you just suspend for a second? I know that we have one witness. Don't leave yet. I have one question for you. You said one. I just have one question for you, Mr. Kasner. And if anyone else has a quick question for him, I know he has to leave, but he's also offered to answer questions in writing if need be afterwards. You had said earlier that TAs or traffic alerts, which we heard traffic, is still see and avoid. Can you just say why that is for people in the audience?
Well, in the case of an oral alert, your attention is simply directed out the window as before, except in this case, you enjoy a bit of information about where to restrict your search. But even if you're using a display, you're searching on the display. We're not going to take the human out of the loop here.
Right, you're still searching. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks, I just wanted to make sure people were aware of that. Thank you for, did you want to add?
Add to that for, again, for aviation and helicopters at those low altitudes, as Mr. Invectin has said, we cannot afford to be focused inside of the helicopter really at all. Actually, one of the exhibits showed that, pilots only look inside every, I think, 9.2 seconds, something to that realm. So it's not reasonable to have a pilot look for a traffic advisory, process that, orient, figure out where they are, then do something about it. That we're talking over 10 seconds, which is not compatible for us, which is why we're fixated on the resolution advisory capability of ACAS XR.
Thank you very much for adding that. And thank you for participating on the panel, and have a good flight. No. Back to you, Mr. Shin.
Thank you. Dr. Kunze, ATAS, that's ADSB Traffic Advisory System, if I got that acronym correct.
That's correct.
Uses ADSB. Is it using ADSB pressure or GPS altitude?
It can use both, but it defaults to pressure altitude when available.
And as we talked about during panel 1 with the pressure altitude for the Black Hawk, potentially having an offset from its true altitude, can you give us your assessment on how this would impact the effectivity of ATAS?
Yeah, it actually generalizes to ACAS as well. One of the key considerations when designing these types of systems is how the system responds in the presence of known or unknown errors. ADSB is unique in the sense that it actually tells you the quality of the data that you have, so you get an estimate of the error and therefore the trustworthiness of the data that you're receiving, but you don't get that with some of the other sensor systems that we use today. So when you design a system, a majority of the work is actually spent on designing robustness into the system for errors in position, velocity, altitude, or similar. Dropouts actually is a very common, especially at low altitudes. You sometimes lose a track, or things like latency if you have a secondary system that rebroadcasts information. So the work that we have been doing in the special committees for ACAS X, as well as the work that we had to do for ATAS back in the day, a large amount, we simulate millions of midair collisions over and over, and we inject over and over, like all kinds of different errors, combinations of errors. And then it comes down to tuning the system to have robustness to the presence of errors while maintaining the safety and operational suitability or nuisance alert characteristics. So it really is a game of tuning it just right with the knobs to satisfy all the design objectives that you might have. You could optimize for perfect data, and you could get very, very, very good alerting. But as soon as you move off of that perfect data and you have the presence of an error, the system would be too brittle and it would break, and you would get nuisance alerts again, or you would miss alerts altogether. And so the design to be robust to the presence of errors is a fundamental consideration when you build these kinds of systems.
Mr. Suki, can you expand on why pressure altitude is the default used for TCAS and also for ACAS?
Yeah, because of just the, I guess, the standardization of pressure altitude in aviation, and its ability to be used without having to be compensated, at all altitudes, and so it'll be the same for each aircraft, or I should say uncorrected. So just because of its availability, it's out there. It's used internationally, so it's sort of standardized in that respect, and that's why it's leveraged.
Thank you. And one last question. This probably will also be for Mr. Suki. We talked during panel 1 about how with older technologies like the barometric altimeters that use aneroid wafers are very mechanical, and so they have multiple errors that can stack up in that design compared to newer technologies like air data computers that have higher accuracy. How do collision avoidance technologies compensate for the varying types of pressure altitude accuracies or inaccuracies that you may have in the national airspace system?
So I would go back to what Dr. Kunze was talking about, is building the robustness in the collision avoidance capability. We're not looking so much as accounting for error. It's what we get from the transponder and the quantization of that information to the transponder. And then we treat that along with all these other state uncertainties and make our determination of needing to alert or not based off of that. So it's more what we're fed, and we're dealing with what we're fed with our robustness checks and tests associated in the alerting logic, and we go with that. So we're not down at the finer level of all the different errors that tally up.
Sorry, I know I said one last, but this will be my last one. So in something like a Class Bravo airspace, holistically, would it be better to have more accurate pressure altitude data being fed to the transponder when with collision avoidance technologies?
Yeah, better data is always, better. But again, we're having to build for a lot of robustness with other systems that are in the NAS or in the world aviation system, and we have to be able to account for all of them, and we have to ensure that we are interoperable with all of that. So as those enhancements move forward and they're extrapolated to more users, you can lean on them in a more heavy fashion. But as of right now, it's really hard to remove systems from the airspace, and we still have to be accountable for them.
If I may add something to what Neil just said with respect to the errors, one of the things to keep in mind is that the data coming into the system is very important when it comes to determining the quality of the alerting. Better data is better. The flip side to that is the dynamic uncertainty of the behavior of the aircraft is just as important. We may have very good data about an aircraft, but we can't predict the future perfectly. And so you may have very good data that tells you don't have a problem, but then that aircraft maneuvers and you do have a problem. So from an uncertainty perspective, yes, state uncertainty, position, altitude, velocity matters and it needs to be minimized. But that doesn't get rid of the uncertainty problem as a whole, because you have dynamic uncertainty as to what the aircraft is going to do, especially in aircraft that are not in communication with air traffic control or maybe, a VFR aircraft that's not under IFR operations. So that those two buckets are actually very important and need to be considered individually.
Okay, we're going to have Dr. Bramble for a couple of follow-ups.
Yes, Mr. Suchi, bringing the focus back to the accident in question here, I found your table of simulation test results a little overwhelming. So could you just tell me, if equipped with ACAS XR, how long before collision the PAT-25 helicopter would have received a traffic alert?
Yes, about 73 seconds.
73 seconds.
Correct.
And it would have been depicted on a display?
I couldn't tell you what they would have equipped with, but I mean, traditional implementations would have a display.
Okay.
And an oral alert. It would have
Well,
been
right.
traffic.
It would, well, this is a TCAS implementation, so it would have been just like a commercial aircraft implementation that was shown. It would have said traffic with a, if the display was, they were equipped with a display with a yellow circle.
Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Flanagan, can you tell us, is there a current funded program to implement ACAS technology in Army helicopters?
So before I answer that, and I was kind of tempted to jump in during the last discussions, I think that it's important to recognize the overall trade space of the data we're talking about and the data sources. For example, a conclusion from that table is that increasing the altimeter accuracy by 75 feet by decreasing quantization from 100 to 25 feet really made no difference. But what did make the difference was alerting the human earlier and letting them take an action, taking into account the action model of the helicopter. So that's kind of the perspective that we take. Shifting to your question about the implementation timeline, again, our current focus is on the hardware, which is what we have to have before we have the software. As we speak, I have a team which is in PAC server doing component qualification testing. So with that actual box qualifying it for aircraft use, I have another team in Washington that's doing the software-based certification of IFF and transponder functionalities, just like the incumbent transponder. The forward-looking progress for that is we hope to start fielding in 2027.
2027. And is that a funded project, or would you have to ask for funding to implement that technology and all the?
The phase we're in right now is prototyping and integration. So we have to make it suitable for all of Army aviation. So about 4,000 aircraft, 12 different variants. That's no small feat. And that is funded. The actual procurement would start next year with funding hopefully arriving then in FY26.
And they could conceivably be installed in all 4,000 helicopters by 2027?
That's when deliveries would start and fielding would commence.
Oh.
The rate is to be determined.
I see. Okay, that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, Dr. Bramble, you gave me two more. Sorry. First, I want to comment on your analysis of the quantization not mattering. Just remember, these simulations were for this accident geometry only. And when you look at all the possible geometry variations over the NAS, I think you would find out it probably does make a difference. It didn't happen to in this accident.
We agree. Yeah. And we strive to do 25-foot quantization. Most of our aircraft do that.
Okay.
I don't oppose that. I do think it's worth pointing out in the table, though, that the degree of miss was 2 or 3 orders of magnitude with, the advanced notes from ACAS XR. So again, in this situation, it was relevant to point out, I thought.
Okay, thank you. And then Mr. Suki, the last thing I wanted to ask you is, so Dr. Bramble was asking you about the traffic alert to the helicopter with ACAS XR, but you didn't really dive into the resolution advisory that was, because there were 2 separate ones that the helicopter would get. And can you just describe those briefly, quickly?
Yeah, ACAS XR is an ACAS 3 system where, unlike TCAS, where it only provides escape guidance in the vertical dimension, XR provides it in both a horizontal and vertical dimension. And the initial alert that when simulated, the initial alert that typically was the end result was a horizontal alert for the helicopter. And as you continue stepping through the encounter, at every step it reassesses, and it could change your alert and your dimension of the alert, or you could get them in both dimensions as a encounter strengthens.
Thank you. I think Dr. Bauer, that.
Dr. Price has a question.
Thank you. Mr. Suki, I have one question for you covering a topic that will come up in panel 5, safety data, but since you're not on panel 5, I thought I would take advantage of asking you here. It has to do with ADSB performance monitor data that your office submitted for this investigation. The analysis showed that there were 366 TCAS resolution advisories within 10 nautical miles of DCA between 2023 and 2025. Within that set, about a third of those, 123 of the threats that caused those resolution advisories could be positively identified. Could you describe some of the reasons why it might not be possible to identify some of the threats that caused those TCAS RAs?
Yeah, because of the source data where that was extracted from was from an ADSB monitor system that collects RA broadcast information as alerts are encountered. And that database doesn't collect the intruder information unless it's also ADSB equipped. So what's happening is you're getting the RA broadcast, it's collected, we go into the database, we extract, we can identify the aircraft that got the RA, and then with the limited data that's also collected with it, we can try and track down the intruder by mode S address. But we can't, because I don't have the actual raw surveillance associated with the whole encounter, positively identify for the aircraft that don't call out mode S as the intruder, what the intruder was, or, you know. So if it was a mode C aircraft, I wouldn't be able to confidently confirm that I knew who or what the threat was. So it's a limitation in just the database.
Thank you very much. That's my only question.
Chairwoman Hamid, if you could allow me some latitude, we're going to do a slight rearrangement of the witness panel. We're going to move Mr. McIntosh up front, and we're going to recall Mr. Dressler for one question. So hold on one second. Mr. McKinney, I believe you had a question.
Yes, I'm going to go back and rediscuss a little bit about the for-flight electronic flight bag. And since we have Mr. Dressler here, who's experienced using that, I would like to get the non-military operator's perspective of using for-flight in the National Capital Region for traffic monitoring.
Thank you for the question. I was struck earlier by significant differences in the way that we operate, and I think that hopefully has been a consistent theme this week. We use for-flight. However, our aircraft, all of our member aircraft, whether that's medevac or law enforcement, are equipped with multifunction displays that receive traffic information organically. However, we also display for-flight all the time on a knee board. In the case of my company, it's required to be mounted there. We also fly NVGs. We also do not stow our iPad or electronic flight bag at any time during the route structure here. We display the map, and I believe I heard, and I'm open to being corrected, but I believe I heard at one point Mr. Van Vetchen say that he might hand his iPad back to the crew chief during instrument flight profiles. And that struck me. If I'm reading that in error or listen to that in error, then that is my mistake. We're a single pilot instrument flight rules program, meaning one pilot, me, possibly, I think the general asked me the other day, if I'm carrying a patient, I might very well be flying an instrument approach into our hospitals with the med crew in the back. So truly just me. And we display, for people who don't know what for-flight is, it has several pages on it, and the primary one is a map page. When you fly instrument flight rules, you are required to also have available what are called approach plates, and it's a graphical depiction of your approach course. Well, that is able to be superimposed on the map itself, and on that map, just like in a car, using a car GPS system,
you're able to display your own ship, your position with a blue dot. So I'm unsure how I would ever be able to complete an instrument flight without having my iPad on my leg. We don't turn them off during NVG operations. We may dim the screen slightly. We adjust them. But in today's NVG world, with the quality of NVG, there's no necessity to turn off or cover or stow an iPad, particularly in the DC route structure. I'm also unsure how you would be able to know where you are